There's a boy lying in a hospital bed somewhere. His name is Ash Ketchum, and he's been there for what doctors estimate could be decades now. The machines beep softly in rhythm with his heartbeat. His mother visits every day, her hair graying with each passing year, whispering stories about the adventures he's supposedly having, the friends he's supposedly making. But Ash isn't adventuring. Ash is dreaming. And in that dream, he's forever 10 years old, chasing an impossible goal across an endless landscape where time doesn't flow the way it should, where people appear and disappear like fragments of memory, where he never grows older, never has to face the reality waiting for him beyond the warm cocoon of unconsciousness. This isn't a story about Pokémon. This is a story about a mind protecting itself from the truth. Hey there, night owls and lore lovers. Before we dive deep into this dream world, I just want to say that if you're finding this content helpful for falling asleep, or if you're genuinely interested in these dark theories, drop a comment below and let me know what other anime or game theories keep you up at night. And if you're enjoying this slower, more contemplative style of content, really does help the channel grow. If you want more of these deep dives into the unsettling corners of our favorite childhood franchises, hit that subscribe button because there's plenty more where this came from. Now, let's enter the dream. It begins on a morning that should have been perfect. April 1st, 1997. The date itself feels prophetic now, doesn't it? April Fool's Day. The day everything became a cosmic joke. A 10-year-old boy named Ash Ketchum wakes up late, his alarm clock destroyed in his sleep by his own restless movements. He's supposed to be at Professor Oak's laboratory in Pallet Town to receive his first Pokémon, to begin the journey that every child in this world dreams of taking when they reach that magical age. 10 years old, the age of freedom, the age of adventure, the age where, somehow, society has decided it's perfectly acceptable to send children wandering into a wilderness filled with creatures that can breathe fire, generate electricity powerful enough to light up cities, or simply crush you with psychic force. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Ash rushes out of his house in his pajamas, not even stopping to properly dress. His mother waves him off with that eternally patient smile, that Madonna-like serenity that never quite breaks regardless of what happens. And that should have been the first sign, shouldn't it? What mother lets her only son rush out into the world in his sleepwear without so much as a packed lunch? But in dreams, these things make sense. In dreams, mothers are archetypes rather than people. They wave, they smile, they exist in the background of your consciousness, never quite solid enough to be real. When Ash arrives at the lab, he's too late. The other new trainers have already selected their Pokémon. 3 children his age, and somehow Gary Oak, the professor's grandson, who's already driving away in a car despite being 10 years old, followed by a parade of cheerleaders. Again, this makes sense in dreams. Gary represents everything Ash wants to be. Confident, successful, already ahead. The rival who's always just beyond reach. The shadow self that taunts you with the life you could have had if only you'd been better, faster, earlier. Professor Oak offers Ash the only Pokémon left, a Pikachu, a creature that should be small and manageable, but this one is different. This one sparks with barely contained energy. This one doesn't want to be here. This one shocks Ash repeatedly, each jolt of electricity a small preview of what's to come. The pain is dismissed as comedy. The violence is framed as personality, and Ash accepts it because what choice does he have? This is his only option. This is his only way forward. They set out together, Ash dragging his unwilling partner on a rope because Pikachu refuses to enter its Pokeball. There's something deeply unsettling about this when you really think about it. A child dragging a creature that keeps electrocuting him. Both of them miserable, both of them trapped in a dynamic neither wanted. But Ash perseveres because the dream demands it. The story must begin. The hero must start his journey. The early encounters blur together in the way that dreams do. Ash spots a wild Pidgey, tries to capture it without his Pokemon's help, and fails. He spots what he thinks is another Pidgey, throws a rock at it, and awakens something far more dangerous, a Spearow. Not the gentle, common bird Pokemon he expected, but something vicious, something angry, something that calls its entire flock to hunt him down. And here's where everything changes. Here's where the accident happens. Here's where Ash Ketchum, 10 years old, excited about his first day as a trainer, encounters the event that will trap him in an eternal loop of childhood. He runs. Of course he runs. The flock is massive, their beaks sharp, their intent murderous. They swarm like a dark cloud, chasing him across fields and through forests. He jumps into a river to escape them. He's fished out by a girl with red hair and a fishing rod, Misty, the first companion, the first fragment of his fractured psyche that will travel with him. She points him toward Viridian City, toward the Pokémon Center where his injured Pikachu can receive help. But the Spearow find them again. They always find you in dreams, don't they? The things you're running from always catch up. Ash steals Misty's bike in desperation. He pedals as fast as his young legs can pump. Pikachu cradled in his arms, the bike wheels splashing through puddles as a storm breaks overhead. Thunder rolls across the sky, lightning flashes. The weather itself turns hostile, as if nature itself is conspiring against this child's survival. And then it happens. The bike crashes. Or maybe the lightning strikes. Or maybe both. The specific mechanism doesn't matter in the analysis that follows. What matters is the result. Ash Ketchum, 10 years old, lies on the ground surrounded by Spearow, their beaks ready to tear into his flesh. He doesn't run. He can't run anymore. Instead, he spreads his arms over Pikachu and tells the Pokémon to get into its Pokeball where it will be safe. This selfless act, this moment of genuine heroism, from a child who's done nothing but blunder through his first day, becomes the trigger. Pikachu, moved by Ash's sacrifice, leaps into the air, and something happens. Lightning strikes the small Pokémon, or perhaps the Pokémon calls the lightning, or perhaps there's no difference anymore between the two. The electrical discharge is massive, unprecedented, powerful enough to send the entire Spearow flock flying, powerful enough to destroy Misty's bicycle completely, powerful enough to knock both Ash and Pikachu unconscious. The scene that follows is the last moment of Ash's real life. He and Pikachu lie on the ground, the smoking remains of the bicycle scattered around them. The rain stops, the sun breaks through the clouds, and in the sky, a golden Pokémon appears. Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon, the legendary bird said to grant eternal happiness to those who see it. Ash and Pikachu weakly observe it flying away, then presumably walk toward Viridian City, but they don't. That's the lie. That's the dream asserting itself. What actually happens is that Ash doesn't get up. The damage is too severe. The lightning strike, the bike crash, the head trauma, the shock to his system. His body shuts down. He slips into unconsciousness. And days later, when searchers finally find him and his Pokémon, when they rush him to the hospital, when they pump him full of painkillers and stabilizing medications, Ash's mind retreats into itself. It constructs a world where he can continue his adventure, a world where he never has to wake up and face the brain damage, a world where he can be the very best, like no one ever was. The shift is subtle at first. The medications take effect, and the dream stabilizes. Team Rocket, who should be genuinely dangerous criminals, become comical. Their schemes become predictable. They stop being a real threat and transform into a recurring annoyance, a punchline, a familiar pattern that reassures Ash's subconscious that everything is okay. The world becomes safer. The Pokémon battles become less about survival and more about sport. The mortality that lurked in those first few episodes evaporates like morning dew, and Ash's journey truly begins. But it's not a journey outward, it's a journey inward. Every person he meets, every location he visits, every Pokémon he captures, they're all elements of his own psyche made manifest. His mind is constructing an elaborate fantasy to keep him from realizing the truth. Because if Ash figures out he's in a coma, he'll wake up. And waking up means facing the damage. Waking up means confronting whatever broken body and broken brain await him in that hospital bed. So his subconscious builds walls, beautiful, elaborate walls disguised as an adventure. Consider Pikachu. Everyone wonders why Ash's Pikachu is so much more powerful than any other Pikachu in existence. Why it can defeat ground-type Pokémon that should be immune to electric attacks. Why it never evolves despite being in countless battles. Why it refuses to enter its Pokeball. The answer is brutally simple. Pikachu represents Ash's humanity. It's the core of who he is, the essential spark of consciousness that keeps him connected to himself. When Pikachu is separated from Ash in certain episodes, when it's stolen or lost, Ash becomes frantic, desperate, willing to do anything to get it back. Because without Pikachu, without that representation of his humanity, Ash would dissolve into the dream completely. He would become lost in his own subconscious, unable to maintain even the illusion of identity. The fact that Pikachu never evolves into Raichu is significant. Evolution in Ash's dream world represents change, growth, acceptance of new phases of life. But Ash can't allow his core self to change because change means time is passing. Change means growing older. Change means eventually waking up, so Pikachu remains exactly as it is. Powerful, yes. Capable of incredible feats, certainly, but frozen in form. Eternally static. A 10-year-old's Pokémon for a trainer who will be forever 10 years old. And then there are Ash's companions. They appear and disappear throughout his journey, each one representing different aspects of his personality that he's trying to explore or reconcile or understand. Misty comes first, the girl with the bike he destroyed. She follows him ostensibly to get compensation for her ruined bicycle, but the bike is never truly fixed or replaced. She continues traveling with him for reasons that become increasingly vague. She yells at him. She hits him. She criticizes his decisions. But she also supports him, encourages him, and clearly cares about him in ways neither of them fully articulates. Misty is Ash's first attempt at understanding romance, at conceptualizing what a girl might be like, what a relationship might feel like. But she's drawn from limited data. Ash was 10 years old when he slipped into the coma. He had no real experience with girls beyond maybe seeing them in his class, watching his mother, observing relationships on television. So Misty is cobbled together from fragments and assumptions. She's a tomboy because Ash understands boyish things. She's volatile because he doesn't understand female emotions. She's interested in water Pokémon because water represents feelings, the unconscious, the depths he can't fully navigate. And she's ultimately unattainable because Ash's subconscious knows that real relationships require growth, maturity, and change, none of which are available to someone locked at age 10 forever. When Misty eventually leaves the group to take over the Cerulean City gym, it feels abrupt. One moment she's a constant presence, the next she's gone, returned to a static position managing a building she supposedly inherited responsibilities for. But this makes sense when you understand what's happening. Ash's subconscious is cycling through aspects of his personality. He's explored what Misty represents as much as his limited understanding allows. Now he needs to make room for new explorations, new fragments of self. So Misty exits stage left, frozen in her gym, always available for return visits, but no longer part of the active journey. Brock is more complicated. Brock joins the group early, leaving his family and his position as Pewter City gym leader to travel with Ash. His stated goal is to become a Pokémon breeder or a Pokémon doctor, but his more obvious characteristic is his constant, desperate attempts to flirt with every woman he encounters. It's played for laughs. Every attractive woman brings Brock to his knees in exaggerated declarations of love. Every advance is rejected, every attempt at connection fails, and something or someone always physically drags him away from these encounters, literally pulling him by the ear or tail until he's forced to abandon his pursuit. Brock represents Ash's sexuality, not in an explicit way, but in the confused, barely understood way that a 10-year-old boy might be dimly aware of attraction without having any context for it. Ash fell into his coma as a virgin, as someone who hadn't yet experienced puberty, who didn't understand desire or intimacy beyond vague concepts absorbed from media and overheard conversations. So Brock becomes the outlet for these stirrings. He's older than Ash, more mature in appearance if not behavior, and he explicitly pursues women in ways that Ash himself can't. But Brock can never succeed because Ash has no template for what successful romantic connection looks like. He's never experienced it. He can't imagine it properly. So Brock fails, repeatedly, eternally, his desire always frustrated, his advances always rebuffed. The episodes where Brock temporarily leaves the group are telling. He goes to stay with Professor Ivy, and when he returns, he's deeply disturbed. He refuses to talk about what happened. He becomes almost traumatized at the mention of her name. What happened during Brock's time with Professor Ivy? Nothing in the literal sense, but in the symbolic sense. Ash's subconscious tried to let his sexuality actually succeed, actually connect with another person, and it couldn't handle it. Ash doesn't have the mental framework for sexual intimacy. He was 10 years old. So when Brock's story moved in that direction, Ash's subconscious panicked and brought him back, traumatized by an experience it couldn't properly construct or process. Brock leaves and returns multiple times throughout the series. Whenever Ash encounters a new female companion, Brock initially departs, as if Ash can't handle exploring both his sexuality and his understanding of femininity simultaneously. But eventually Brock always returns because those urges don't go away. They keep resurfacing, demanding attention, even if that attention can only manifest as comedy and failure. Tracy Sketchit appears during one of Brock's absences. He's a Pokémon watcher, someone who observes and sketches Pokémon rather than battling them. He represents a possible future for Ash where he doesn't compete, doesn't strive, doesn't push himself toward conflict. A gentler path, an artistic path, a path of observation rather than participation. But Ash rejects this. Tracy is sent to work with Professor Oak and quickly fades from prominence. The peaceful observer can't be allowed to influence Ash's journey because the journey requires conflict. The dream requires challenges. Without obstacles to overcome, Ash might start questioning why he's traveling at all, might start wondering if there's something else he should be doing, might start waking up. Gary Oak deserves special attention. He's introduced as Ash's rival, his childhood friend turned competitor. Gary has everything Ash wants: confidence, a car despite being 10 years old, a group of cheerleaders, early success in his Pokémon journey. He seems to excel at everything while Ash struggles. But Gary isn't really a separate person. Gary is what Ash wishes he could be. Gary is the ideal, the fantasy of competence and success. Every time Gary appears, he's ahead of Ash in some way. More badges collected, more Pokémon captured, more respect earned. He exists to drive Ash forward, to provide motivation, to represent the goal. And then something strange happens. Gary stops being a trainer. He becomes a Pokémon researcher. He settles down. He chooses a stable, academic path rather than continuing the endless journey. Why? Because Ash's subconscious needs Gary to succeed and then stop. If Gary keeps being the perfect rival forever, Ash will never feel like he can catch up. But if Gary achieves his goals and moves on to a peaceful life, then Ash can continue his journey without feeling perpetually inadequate. Gary becomes what Ash wishes he could be, someone who finds success and contentment. But Ash can't follow that path because his path is eternal. His journey can't end, so Gary settles while Ash continues, both of them achieving what they need within the logic of the dream. When Gary exits as the primary rival, new rivals appear. Paul in the Sinnoh region represents Ash's darker impulses, his frustration, his aggressive drive to be better. Paul is cold, calculating, willing to abandon Pokémon he deems weak. He represents the part of Ash that's angry about being trapped in this situation, that wants to push harder, force his way out through sheer determination and ruthlessness. Trip in Unova is similar but more dismissive, more contemptuous. Each new rival is a fragment of Ash's personality given form, allowing him to battle against aspects of himself, to integrate and understand different pieces of his psyche. The Team Rocket trio requires careful examination. Jesse, James, and Meowth are positioned as antagonists, but they're the strangest antagonists imaginable. They follow Ash constantly. They appear in almost every location regardless of how remote. They have an obsession with capturing Pikachu specifically despite the existence of countless more powerful or rare Pokémon. Their schemes always fail. Their goals are never achieved. They're trapped in a cycle of pursuit, defeat, and return that would make no sense for actual criminals. But they make perfect sense as aspects of Ash's personality. Jessie represents the parts of himself he's ashamed of. She's vain, jealous, desperate for approval. James represents the privileged life Ash never had. the wealth and comfort he dimly envisions when he thinks about what successful people have. He's effeminate, gentle despite his villain role, more interested in his Pokémon as companions than as tools. Meowth is the voice of self-awareness, the part of Ash that can sometimes see the absurdity of what's happening. Meowth talks, breaking the barrier between Pokémon and human language, able to explain Pokémon feelings and motivations in ways Ash can understand. Together they form the Shadow Self, the negative qualities that Ash needs to acknowledge and integrate, but can't fully accept. They want Pikachu, his humanity, which represents his desire to give up, to hand over his essential self to some external authority, to stop fighting and just let go. Giovanni, their boss, barely appears in the anime, always distant, always demanding results through intermediaries. Giovanni represents Ash's absent father, the male authority figure who's never there, who demands without supporting, who judges without understanding. Team Rocket blasts off at the end of most encounters, literally shooting into the sky as a twinkling star. It's cartoonish, impossible, repeated so often it becomes their defining characteristic. But that twinkling star is significant. It's a symbol of wishes, of hope, of things remaining forever out of reach. Ash defeats his negative qualities over and over, but they never go away. They return in the next episode, ready to try again. Because you can't permanently defeat the parts of yourself you don't like. You can only keep confronting them, keep acknowledging them, keep fighting to ensure they don't control you. The structure of Ash's dream stabilizes into a pattern. He arrives in a new region. He meets new companions. He challenges 8 gym leaders. He competes in the regional Pokémon League. He places well, but never wins. Then he moves to the next region and starts over. The cycle repeats. The details change, but the structure remains identical. It's a mandala, a recursive pattern that his subconscious can follow without requiring too much. Creative energy. Like a screensaver on a computer, it provides activity and variation, while maintaining the essential stasis. Each region represents Ash's mind trying to explore different aspects of reality and himself. Kanto is the foundation, the baseline, the original dream. Johto is directly connected to Kanto, representing early attempts to expand the dream, without venturing too far from familiar territory. The legendary Pokémon Ash encounters there, Suicune, Entei, and Raikou, are the legendary beasts that Ho-Oh supposedly created. They represent different aspects of the accident itself. Suicune is the water he plunged into fleeing the Spearow. Raikou is the lightning that struck. Entei is the volcanic intensity of the trauma itself. Hoenn takes Ash further from home, to a more tropical environment where water routes are common and the weather changes dramatically. This represents his subconscious branching out, trying to imagine environments beyond his limited real-world experience of Pallet Town and its surroundings. The abundance of water in Hoenn reflects the unconscious mind, the depths beneath the surface. The battle between Groudon and Kyogre, land and sea, represents the struggle between conscious control and unconscious chaos. Sinnoh introduces more overt mythology, the creation myth of Dialga, Palkia, and Arceus, frames the region's legendary encounters. Dialga controls time, Palkia controls space. Arceus supposedly created everything. These aren't just Pokémon, they're Ash's subconscious recognizing the fundamental issues with his situation. Time isn't flowing correctly, he's stuck. Space isn't real, he's creating locations from fragments of memory and imagination. and some original source, Arceus or his own pre-accident mind, created this entire construct he's trapped within. The regions that follow, Unova, Kalos, Alola, become increasingly abstract. Unova is the furthest from Kanto geographically, based on America rather than Japan, representing Ash's mind venturing into territory he has no real reference for. The Pokémon are completely different, none of the original 151 species appearing in the wild, as if his subconscious is struggling to maintain continuity. Kalos introduces Mega Evolution, Pokémon temporarily achieving more powerful forms before returning to normal, perhaps representing Ash's occasional surges toward consciousness that never fully materialize. Alola abandons gyms entirely, replacing them with trials and island challenges, the structure breaking down as the dream extends across years or decades. And through all of this, Ash never ages. It's not that he ages slowly, he doesn't age at all. He's introduced as 10 years old in Kanto. He's still 10 years old in Unova. He's still 10 years old in Alola. The narrator explicitly states this at the beginning of the Black and White series, as if to remind viewers, as if to remind Ash himself, you are 10 years old. You will always be 10 years old. Time is not passing for you. You are stuck. Think about what this means in practical terms. Ash travels through 8 regions, each with multiple cities and towns, dozens of routes between them. He walks most of these distances, even accounting for flying on Pokémon or riding bikes occasionally. The sheer mileage would require months or years. He participates in numerous Pokémon leagues, each requiring qualification through collecting 8 gym badges, each league itself lasting at least several days of tournament battles. He encounters legendary Pokémon repeatedly, involves himself in regional crises, saved the world multiple times over, and at the end of all this, he's still 10 years old. But other characters age around him, or seem to. Brock's siblings appear older when Ash revisits Pewter City. May and Max, the siblings from Hoenn, show different levels of maturity when they appear in later regions. Dawn's Pokémon develop and evolve. Iris becomes a gym leader. Clement's inventions become more sophisticated. The world around Ash seems to experience time, while Ash himself remains frozen. Why? Because they're not real. None of them are real in the sense of being independent entities. They're projections, aspects of Ash's psyche, or fragments of people he might have known before the accident. They can appear to age because they're not constrained by Ash's central dilemma. But Ash can't age because aging means accepting that time is passing in the real world, that his real body is getting older in that hospital bed, that he's losing his childhood and adolescence to an accident and coma. So he remains 10, eternally, unchangingly, a Peter Pan figure locked in his personal Neverland. The Pokémon themselves follow different rules than the human characters. They evolve, becoming stronger and more mature versions of themselves. This happens regularly with Ash's own Pokémon. Caterpie evolves into Metapod and then Butterfree. Charmander evolves into Charmeleon and then Charizard. Trico becomes Grovyle and then Sceptile. The evolutions are celebrated, framed as positive growth and development. But what do they really represent? They're Ash's achievements, his psychological progress. Each Pokémon evolution represents Ash overcoming some internal obstacle, integrating some aspect of his personality, achieving some small victory in his unconscious journey toward wholeness. The Pokémon are fragments of his self, that he's able to develop and strengthen. When a Pokémon evolves, it's Ash's psyche acknowledging growth in that particular area. But the growth is always limited to the Pokémon. Ash himself can't evolve. His core self must remain static to maintain the dream. This is why Ash frequently releases or leaves behind his strongest Pokémon. When Butterfree finds a mate, Ash releases it to migrate with the pink Butterfree. When Charizard becomes too powerful and stops obeying Ash's commands, it's left at the Charisific Valley to train. When Greninja develops a unique bond with Ash that transforms it into an unprecedented Ash Greninja form, it's ultimately left behind in Kalos to protect the region's ecosystem. Pidgeot, Primeape, Lapras, Goodra, the list continues. Powerful, developed Pokémon that represent fully integrated aspects of Ash's personality are removed from his active team. Why would he do this? Why would someone on a quest to become a Pokémon master constantly handicap himself by releasing or benching his most powerful partners? Because having a team that's too strong would end the dream. If Ash assembled and maintained a team of fully evolved, type-diverse, powerfully bonded Pokémon, he would dominate every challenge. He would win Pokémon Leagues. He would achieve his goal. The journey would end. And if the journey ends, what comes next? Waking up, confronting reality, facing the damaged body and mind waiting in that hospital bed. So Ash's subconscious creates reasons to reset his team. Professor Oak supposedly needs to study certain Pokémon. Other trainers supposedly need specific Pokémon more than Ash does. Regions have different ecosystems that require fresh starts with local Pokémon. Each excuse serves the same purpose, preventing Ash from becoming too strong, from reaching a point where the journey could legitimately conclude. The gym leaders and Elite Four members represent primary aspects of Ash's personality that he must confront directly. Each gym leader specializes in a specific Pokémon type, and that type represents a particular trait or challenge. Brock, the first gym leader Ash faces, uses Rock-type Pokémon, representing stability, defense, the foundations of personality. Misty uses Water types, emotion, and the unconscious. Lieutenant Surge uses Electric types, aggression, and direct power. Erica uses Grass types, growth and nurturing, and so on through all the gyms in all the regions. When Ash battles a gym leader, he's not really fighting another person. He's confronting that aspect of himself, proving he can handle it, integrating it into his personality structure. Winning the gym badge is symbolic acknowledgement that he's mastered that particular challenge. The badges accumulate like merit badges or therapy achievements, marking progress through his psychological journey. The Elite Four function similarly but at a higher level. They're more developed, more powerful aspects of personality that can only be confronted after Ash has integrated the basics represented by the 8 gym leaders. And the champion stands as the ultimate expression of what Ash could become if he fully integrated all aspects of himself. But he never defeats the champion in any region until the very end of his dream journey. He comes close. He gets further each time. But he doesn't win because winning would mean the dream is over. Winning would mean he's achieved complete psychological integration. Winning would mean waking up, except he does win eventually. In Alola, Ash finally becomes a regional champion. It's treated as a huge moment, a culmination of everything he's worked toward. But look at the context. Alola doesn't have a traditional Pokémon League structure. it doesn't have the same Elite Four setup. The championship Ash wins is in a league that's just been established, in a region whose entire structure is different from everywhere else. His victory is real within the dream's logic, but it's also conditional, qualified, not quite the same as winning the Indigo Plateau or the Lily of the Valley Conference. Why does Ash's subconscious allow this victory? Perhaps because by this point, the dream has extended for so long that some kind of acknowledgement of progress is necessary. Perhaps allowing a victory in a non-traditional structure satisfies the need for achievement while still maintaining the essential pattern. Perhaps it's a sign that Ash's mind is beginning to prepare for the possibility of waking up, allowing success in a safe, contained way before potentially allowing real consciousness to return. The legendary Pokémon that appear throughout Ash's journey are particularly significant. These aren't ordinary creatures, they're gods, or close to gods, within the world's mythology. They control fundamental aspects of reality: time, space, life, death, dimensions, creation itself. And Ash encounters them repeatedly. He interacts with them. He sometimes befriends them. He's saved by them. They seem to take a special interest in him. Why would these godlike beings care about one ordinary 10-year-old trainer? They wouldn't, not in a real sense. But in the logic of the dream, they represent Ash's deepest unconscious awareness. They're the parts of his mind that understand what's really happening, that know he's trapped, that want to help him but can't intervene directly. Each legendary encounter is his deepest self trying to communicate, trying to guide him toward either deeper integration that might allow him to wake up, or deeper acceptance that might allow him to dream peacefully. Ho-Oh appears at the very beginning, at the moment the dream starts. It represents the promise that Ash made to himself in that moment between the accident and unconsciousness. He would find eternal happiness, and his eternal happiness is this dream of adventure, this eternal childhood, this journey that never has to end. Ho-Oh grants his wish by allowing him to remain in this state. Every subsequent appearance of Ho-Oh is a reminder of that original promise, a reinforcement of the dream's purpose. Mewtwo appears in Ash's first movie adventure, the first Pokémon that directly challenges Ash's understanding of his world. Mewtwo is artificial, created by humans, and deeply angry about its existence. It questions whether artificial life has value, whether created beings can be real. It literally turns Ash to stone, killing him briefly before the tears of the surrounding Pokémon revive him. This is hugely significant. Ash dies and is brought back. His subconscious is directly confronting the possibility of death, of final ending, but then rejecting it. The Pokémon tears represent the collective will to keep the dream going, to keep Ash in this world, rather than letting him slip into actual death. Celebi, the time travel Pokémon, appears in another movie. It can move through time freely, taking people to past and future. But when Ash encounters Celebi, he doesn't use it to change anything fundamental about his situation. Time travel is possible in his dream world, but it doesn't affect him. He remains 10 years old. He remains on his journey. The ability to manipulate time exists, but doesn't apply to him because applying it would break the dream's structure. Jirachi grants wishes, but only awakens for 7 days every 1,000 years. The brief window of wish granting that Ash experiences with Jirachi represents fleeting moments of conscious thought. brief instances where Ash might become aware enough to change something about his situation, but the window always closes. Jirachi returns to sleep, the wishes fade, and Ash continues as before. The sheer number of legendary encounters increases as the regions progress. By the time Ash reaches Alola and beyond, legendary and mythical Pokémon appear regularly, almost casually. This could represent his dream becoming less stable, the barriers between ordinary and extraordinary breaking down as the coma extends. Or it could represent his subconscious becoming more comfortable with examining the fundamental structures of the dream, peeling back layers to understand what's supporting everything. The concept of multiple timelines and alternate dimensions emerges in later regions. Giratina dwells in the distortion world, a reverse dimension where physics works differently. Ultra Beasts come from Ultra Space, an entirely separate dimension with its own creatures and rules. The idea that reality is not singular, that multiple versions exist simultaneously, maps perfectly onto the Coma Theory. Ash's mind is creating multiple possible versions of events, multiple interpretations of what could have happened or might be happening. The boundaries between these constructed realities become thinner as the dream extends. Let's talk about the Nurse Joys and Officer Jennies. In every town, in every city, across multiple regions spanning a continent or possibly multiple continents, there's a Nurse Joy working at the Pokémon Center. They all look identical. They all sound identical. They have identical personalities and identical jobs. The same applies to Officer Jenny, who serves as the police presence in most locations. The game explanation is that they're families, that all Nurse Joys are cousins and all Officer Jennies are cousins, and they just happen to look and sound exactly alike. But in the context of the dream, they represent something far more important: stability and safety. Nurse Joy is the maternal figure who heals and nurtures. No matter where Ash goes, no matter how far he travels, there's always a Nurse Joy ready to help him, to restore his Pokémon, to provide a safe place to rest. She's the good mother archetype, the unconditional support that his real mother provided before the accident. Officer Jenny represents authority and protection, the assurance that someone is maintaining order and safety in the world. Together they form anchors, fixed points of familiarity that reassure Ash that despite all the chaos and adventure, he's fundamentally safe. Nothing truly bad can happen when Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny are always there. The fact that they appear everywhere, that they're omnipresent, reveals the artificial nature of Ash's constructed world. In reality, this kind of identical staffing would be impossible and absurd. But in a dream, in a construct designed to keep someone feeling safe, it makes perfect sense. These aren't really separate people. They're the same reassuring archetype repeated endlessly. A security blanket woven into the fabric of the dream itself. The way Pokémon Center's function supports this interpretation. They provide completely free healthcare. Ash never pays for having his Pokémon healed. No matter how often he visits, no matter how severe the injuries, he can rest there, receive food and shelter, access computer systems to communicate with Professor Oak, all without any exchange of money or resources. It's a child's fantasy of healthcare, where healing is freely available and always effective, where the consequences of battle and danger are erased with no cost or complication. Real hospitals aren't like this. Real hospitals especially aren't like this for coma patients, whose care is expensive, prolonged, and often inadequate. But in Ash's dream, healing is instant and free because that's what he needs it to be. The technology in Ash's world deserves scrutiny. Pokeballs can convert matter into energy and back, storing living creatures in impossibly small spaces. Computers can transfer Pokemon as data between locations instantaneously. The Pokédex can identify and provide information on any Pokemon it encounters. Flying machines, submarines, and other advanced vehicles exist, yet the world maintains a strangely rural, pastoral quality with small towns and wild areas dominating the landscape. This technological inconsistency makes sense in a dream logic. The technology exists to serve the plot's needs, to provide whatever function is necessary at the moment without requiring consistent rules or limitations. Ash's subconscious isn't trying to build a coherent technological society. It's providing tools that allow the adventure to continue. The Pokédex explains things Ash doesn't understand. Pokeballs catch creatures he wants to capture. The PC system ensures he can access any Pokemon he needs without carrying them all. Each technology exists to solve a problem the dream encounters, implemented without worrying about underlying physics or manufacturing or economics. The Pokemon themselves require careful consideration as entities within the dream. They're not normal animals, they're superpowered creatures capable of extraordinary feats. They can be captured and stored. They obey commands from their trainers. They love their trainers with what seems like unwavering loyalty. They're simultaneously dangerous enough to require licenses and training to handle, yet common enough that 10-year-old children are routinely sent out into the world to capture and train them. In the real world, this would be insane. In Ash's dream, it represents his relationship with different aspects of his psyche and different skills or abilities he's trying to develop. Each Pokemon species represents a different trait, a different capability, a different aspect of self. Capturing a Pokemon is integrating that trait into his personality structure. Training a Pokemon is developing that capability. Battling with Pokemon is testing himself, proving he can deploy these aspects of himself effectively in challenging situations. The diversity of Pokemon types maps onto the diversity of human traits and abilities. Water types represent emotion and adaptability. Fire types represent passion and aggression. Grass types represent growth and healing. Electric types represent energy and quick thinking. Psychic types represent intellect and intuition. Fighting types represent discipline and physical capability. The list continues through all 18 types and their various combinations, creating a complex taxonomy of human psychological attributes. When Ash catches a Pokemon, he's not really capturing a creature. He's acknowledging and accepting a part of himself. When he trains a Pokemon, he's developing that part. When he battles with Pokemon, he's putting those parts into practice, testing them against challenges both internal and external. The Pokemon don't have true independence. They're extensions of Ash's will, fragments of his personality given form and agency within the dream structure. This explains why Ash's Pokemon often disobey him, especially when they're powerful or recently caught. They represent aspects of his personality that he hasn't fully integrated yet. Charizard stops obeying after it evolves because Ash isn't ready to wield that much power and passion. Primeape is too angry, too aggressive. Snivy from Unova is too confident and dismissive. Disobedient Pokémon represent parts of Ash that he needs to work with, understand, and incorporate before they'll function smoothly as part of his team. The relationships between Pokémon and their trainers in Ash's world are idealized to an almost troubling degree. Pokémon almost never rebel against the system. They don't question why they should fight for their trainers. They don't ask for freedom or autonomy beyond occasional episodes where the moral of the story is that forcing Pokémon to battle is wrong, yet the system continues unchanged. They love their trainers unconditionally, suffer their trainers willingly, sacrifice themselves in battle for their trainers repeatedly. This is a child's understanding of relationships, or perhaps more accurately, a traumatized child's fantasy of relationships. In Ash's dream, love and loyalty are absolute. Pokémon represent the idealized companion who will never abandon you, never truly hurt you despite occasional disobedience, never demand more than you can give. They're the perfect friends for someone who's fundamentally alone, trapped in his own mind, unable to form real connections with real people because real people exist in a reality he can no longer access. The bond between Ash and his Pikachu specifically reinforces this. Pikachu starts out hostile and develops into Ash's closest companion. It never wants to be in its Pokeball, preferring to stay out where it can interact with Ash directly. It rides on Ash's shoulder or walks beside him. It sleeps with him. It battles for him with a ferocity and power that exceeds any other Pikachu. The relationship is portrayed as transcendent, as the perfect example of human Pokemon partnership. But in the context of the Coma, Pikachu is literally the piece of Ash that stays closest to his conscious awareness, the fragment of self he can't afford to lose or distance himself from even briefly. The various evil teams Ash confronts, Team Rocket, Team Magma, Team Aqua, Team Galactic, Team Plasma, and the others, represent different negative impulses and destructive patterns. Team Rocket wants to steal and exploit Pokémon, representing selfish exploitation of one's own abilities. Team Magma and Team Aqua want to expand land or sea respectively, representing imbalanced approaches to consciousness versus unconsciousness. Team Galactic wants to destroy and recreate the world, representing suicidal ideation and the desire to escape reality through destruction and rebirth. Team Plasma claims to want to liberate Pokémon, representing the temptation to give up, to release all the integrated aspects of self and dissolve back into unconsciousness. Each villainous team is defeated, but new ones emerge in subsequent regions. This represents the ongoing nature of psychological struggle. You don't defeat your negative impulses once and have them stay defeated. They re-emerge in new forms, requiring constant vigilance and repeated victories. The fact that most team leaders have sympathetic backstories or understandable motivations reflects the reality that our negative patterns often arise from legitimate pain or unmet needs. The movies that punctuate the anime series often have higher stakes and more emotional intensity than regular episodes. They frequently involve legendary Pokémon, world-threatening crises, and moments where Ash must make significant sacrifices. In the context of the Coma, these movies represent breakthrough moments in Ash's unconscious journey, times when his psyche is processing particularly significant material or confronting particularly challenging internal conflicts. The higher production values and more cinematic storytelling reflect the importance his subconscious is placing on these experiences. The recurring theme of Ash sacrificing himself for others, particularly for Pikachu, is significant. He throws himself in front of attacks. He risks his life repeatedly. He turns to stone in the first movie and is revived only through the collective tears of the Pokémon. This self-sacrifice represents both his heroism and his underlying death wish. Part of Ash wants to be the hero who saves everyone. Part of Ash is tired of the struggle and wouldn't mind if an honorable death ended the dream. But each time he's brought back, each time the dream continues. Each time the world he's constructed insists he keep living within it. The structure of Pokémon battles reflects Ash's internal conflicts in miniature. Each battle is a controlled engagement between different aspects of self, or between Ash and an external challenge. The turn-based nature of battles, taking hits but staying standing, reflects the ongoing nature of psychological struggle, where progress comes through endurance and strategy, rather than single decisive moments. Winning a battle provides temporary satisfaction and progress toward larger goals, but immediately there's another battle, another challenge, another conflict to navigate. Ash's battle strategy is often criticized by viewers as simplistic or illogical. He relies on friendship and trust rather than optimal type matchups. He makes emotional decisions rather than tactical ones. He believes in his Pokemon's ability to overcome type disadvantages through sheer willpower. This reflects a child's understanding of conflict resolution, where caring enough and trying hard enough should be sufficient to overcome any obstacle. It's naive but pure, and in the dream, it works because the dream rewards purity of intention over sophisticated strategy. The contest system introduced in Hoenn and continued in other regions provides an alternative to traditional battling. Contests judge Pokémon on their beauty, coolness, cuteness, cleverness, and toughness, with performances and appeals replacing straightforward combat. May and Dawn, two of Ash's companions, focus primarily on contests rather than gym battles. This represents another way of engaging with internal aspects of self, focusing on presentation and expression rather than competition and conflict. The fact that Ash occasionally participates in contests but never pursues them seriously reflects his primary orientation toward direct challenge and growth through battle. The various Pokémon leagues and conferences that occur at the end of each region's journey represent culmination points, moments where Ash's progress is tested against the progress of other trainers. He always does well, but until Alola, he never wins. He reaches the top 16, or top 8, or top 4, but something stops him from final victory. Why? Because victory means ending the cycle, completing the journey, achieving the goal. And if the goal is achieved, what comes next? The dream would need to transform fundamentally, or end. So Ash comes close, but doesn't quite succeed, maintaining the structure of striving without arriving. The few times Ash does have complete victories, like winning the Orange League or the Battle Frontier, they're framed as lesser achievements than winning a regional Pokémon League. The Orange League is non-traditional, based on challenges rather than standard battles. The Battle Frontier involves defeating powerful trainers, but doesn't have the same championship structure. These qualified victories allow Ash to experience success without it meaning the dream must end. They're pressure release valves, moments of satisfaction that prevent complete frustration while maintaining the essential pattern. Ash's relationship with his mother remains consistent throughout the series. She appears at the beginning of his journey, supportive and encouraging. She appears occasionally when he returns home to Pallet Town between regions. She never expresses worry about his safety, despite him being a 10-year-old child wandering through territories filled with dangerous creatures. She never demands he come home. She never questions whether he's ready for the responsibilities he's taking on. She's perfectly, impossibly supportive, the ideal mother figure for a dream construct. But where is his father? It's mentioned briefly in early episodes that Ash's father was once a Pokémon trainer, but he's never seen, he's never present. He's essentially absent from Ash's life and from the dream. This absence is conspicuous. Why would Ash's subconscious not include his father in this elaborate construction? Perhaps because his father was absent in real life too. Perhaps because the wound of abandonment is too painful to examine directly, so his father simply doesn't appear. Or perhaps his father is there, hidden in plain sight as Giovanni, the Team Rocket leader, the authority figure who's distant, demanding, and ultimately disapproving, always just out of reach. Professor Oak is the father figure who actually appears, and he's everything Giovanni isn't. He's present, supportive, wise, encouraging. He provides Ash with his Pokédex and his mission. He stores Ash's excess Pokémon. He offers advice and praise. He's the idealized father, the one Ash wishes he had. But even Professor Oak keeps Ash at a distance. He's not traveling with Ash. He's back in Pallet Town, a stable presence that Ash can check in with, but who doesn't interfere in Ash's journey. The perfect balance of support and independence for someone who needs to feel autonomous, while still having guidance available. The economics of Ash's world don't make sense if you examine them closely. Ash never seems to have a job. He occasionally receives prize, money from battle victories, but it's never clear how much money he has, or how he pays for food, clothing, Pokeballs, potions, or any other supplies he needs. Sometimes he's broke, scrounging for food or doing odd jobs. Sometimes he seems fine, able to afford whatever he needs. The inconsistency is dreamlike, where money exists as a concern when it serves the story but disappears when it would be inconvenient. In a real-world scenario, Ash would need significant funding to travel constantly, replace worn equipment, feed himself and his Pokémon, afford transportation when walking isn't viable. The fact that this is never a consistent concern reflects the dream nature of his situation. Practical needs are abstracted, handled by the dream's background logic. Ash doesn't starve. He always finds a place to sleep. He always has the resources he needs to continue his journey because the dream provides what's necessary to maintain itself. The rare times money becomes a plot point, it's always resolved quickly. Ash and his companions might take odd jobs to earn money for food or supplies, but this lasts only an episode before they're back to traveling without financial concerns. The dream acknowledges that money should be a concern, includes a brief narrative about dealing with it, then moves on. It's maintaining an illusion of reality without committing to the logical consequences that real poverty or resource management would require. The passage of time within the dream is surreal. Days and nights cycle, marking the passage of individual days. Seasons change. Holiday episodes occur for various celebrations, but years don't pass, or if they do, They pass in a way that doesn't affect Ash or most of the characters around him. It's eternal present, always now, always the ongoing moment of the journey. The past exists as something to reference or return to, but it doesn't recede the way past does in reality. Events from the first episodes are as accessible and relevant as events from recent episodes. This temporal quality is one of the most dreamlike aspects of Ash's world. In dreams, time doesn't flow linearly. Past, present, and potential future coexist, accessible simultaneously. You can be in multiple places at once, or move between times without transition. Ash's journey has this quality. He's always on his current adventure, but simultaneously connected to all past adventures. He references old friends and old Pokémon as if they were recently present, even when chronologically significant time should have passed. The few times the show directly acknowledges that time has passed, it creates more confusion than clarity. An anniversary episode mentions that a year has passed since Ash and Pikachu met. But Ash is still 10 years old. How can a year pass without Ash aging? The show doesn't explain. It can't explain without breaking the dream's logic. So it mentions the anniversary and moves on, leaving the contradiction unresolved. The dream's geography is equally fluid. Regions are established as distinct areas, but the distances between them and the time required to travel between them vary wildly. Sometimes Ash and friends walk from town to town, and it takes days. Sometimes they cover apparently similar distances in what seems like hours. Sometimes they fly or sail to new regions in single episodes. Sometimes the journey takes multiple episodes. Distance and travel time exist in service to the story rather than following consistent rules. Mountains appear when dramatic scenery is needed. Forests emerge to provide settings for specific Pokémon encounters. Cities materialize as destinations. The world arranges itself around Ash's needs, which is exactly what would happen in a dream construct. The dreamer's subconscious generates environments as needed, drawing from memory, imagination, and the requirements of whatever narrative is unfolding. Let's examine more closely some of the most emotionally resonant episodes, the ones where the show deviates from its standard format to do something more contemplative or unusual. The episode where Ash releases his Butterfree is presented as bittersweet. Butterfree finds a pink mate during migration season and chooses to leave with the flock. Ash, crying, releases it to pursue this happiness. It's one of the first times Ash loses a Pokémon, not through tragedy but through natural progression and choice. In the Coma Theory context, this represents Ash letting go of a fully developed aspect of himself, allowing it to move on to something beyond his direct control. The pink Butterfree represents romance, connection, a life path that Ash can't follow because he's trapped in his journey. Letting Butterfree go is bittersweet because it represents accepting that some parts of himself might move beyond his reach, might find resolution without him, might achieve growth he can't directly experience. But it's also necessary. Holding on too tightly to fully developed aspects prevents further development. The episode where Charizard leaves to train in Cherisific Valley follows a similar pattern but with different emotional weight. Charizard has become too powerful, too confident, too likely to disobey Ash. It represents an aspect of Ash's personality, probably his aggression and pride, that's grown beyond his ability to manage. Leaving it in the valley with other Charizard to train further is both an acknowledgement that this aspect needs more development before it can be safely integrated, and a way of distancing it so it doesn't overwhelm Ash's other attributes. The episode where a haunter pulls Ash's and Pikachu's souls from their bodies is deeply strange and rarely discussed. A chandelier falls on them in the Pokémon Tower. They're injured or dead. Haunter separates their souls, which become ghosts floating around and interacting with the world, while their bodies lie motionless. Eventually the souls return to the bodies, and everything continues as normal. This is one of the most overt near-death experiences in the show. It directly depicts Ash's soul leaving his body. Is this his subconscious acknowledging his physical situation, recognizing that his consciousness is separate from his body, that his body lies motionless somewhere while his spirit wanders this dream world? The fact that the souls return and the episode ends with everything back to normal reinforces the dream's resilience, its ability to confront even death and incorporate it without breaking the fantasy. There are numerous other episodes where reality seems to fray at the edges. The episode where Ash and his friends encounter a mysterious fog that seems to exist outside of normal space and time. The episode where they find a seemingly abandoned town that creates illusions of their deepest fears. The episode where they meet a Latias that can disguise itself as a human girl, blurring the line between Pokémon and person. The episode where they enter a dream world within the dream, dreams nested in dreams like Russian dolls of consciousness. Each of these surreal episodes represents Ash's subconscious probing the boundaries of the dream, testing how much reality can bend before it breaks. They're moments of lucidity, brief recognitions that something isn't quite right, that the world doesn't follow consistent rules, that perhaps there's something deeper happening. But each time the moment passes, the strangeness is explained away or simply accepted. The journey continues. Ash's companions change every few regions, but the pattern of having companions remains constant. He's almost never traveling alone after the first few episodes. There's always someone with him, usually multiple people. This need for companionship reflects a deep loneliness, a recognition that solitary consciousness would be unbearable. The companions provide conversation, different perspectives, emotional support, and narrative variety. They're necessary for the dream to feel like a journey rather than an isolated wandering. But the companions are also distinctly separate from Ash in ways that reveal their nature as projections. They have their own goals that diverge from Ash's. They have their own personalities that contrast with his. They join and leave based on their own narrative arcs. This separateness allows Ash to interact with aspects of himself while maintaining the illusion that they're independent entities. If they were too obviously extensions of him, the dream would become claustrophobic. By giving them apparent autonomy, his subconscious creates the illusion of a populated world rather than a solitary construct. Consider the way new companions are introduced. They always appear at the start of Ash's journey in a new region. They always have reasons to travel with him that align conveniently with his path. They always develop close bonds quickly, and they always leave at the end of the region, often with minimal fanfare, making room for the next region's companions. The mechanical nature of these introductions and departures reveals the constructed nature of the relationships. They serve a purpose within the dream structure, and when that purpose is fulfilled, they exit. The only companion who remains completely constant is Pikachu. Pikachu never leaves. Pikachu can't leave. Pikachu is Ash's humanity, his core self, the one piece of the dream that can't be separated without the entire construct collapsing. Every other companion, every other Pokémon, every other person and creature can come and go. But Pikachu remains riding on Ash's shoulder, walking beside him, sleeping near him, always present. This constancy is both comforting and revealing. It's comforting because it provides stability. It's revealing because it shows that Pikachu is fundamentally different from everything else in the dream. The rare times Pikachu is separated from Ash, the episodes treat it as a crisis. Ash becomes single-mindedly focused on retrieval. He'll team up with anyone, go anywhere, risk anything to get Pikachu back. This isn't just portrayed as caring for a valued Pokémon. It's portrayed as something more primal, more essential. Because if Ash loses Pikachu, if he loses his humanity, his core sense of self, he won't just be sad, he'll be lost. He'll dissolve into the dream completely, becoming an empty shell going through motions without the consciousness that gives those motions meaning. The ongoing saga of Team Rocket trying to steal Pikachu takes on a different meaning in this context. Jessie, James, and Meowth are aspects of Ash's personality that want to hand his humanity over to the absent father figure, Giovanni. They represent the temptation to give up, to surrender consciousness to some external authority, to stop fighting and just let someone else be in control. But they never succeed. Every attempt fails. The pursuit continues. Because Ash can't give up his humanity. He can't hand over his core self. To do so would be to die, spiritually if not physically. The moment in the first movie where Ash turns to stone and is revived by Pokémon tears is the most explicit death and resurrection in the series. Mewtwo's attack literally turns Ash to stone. He's dead, petrified, gone. Pikachu tries desperately to revive him with electric shocks, but it doesn't work. Then all the Pokémon, both the originals and Mewtwo's clones, begin to cry. Their tears fall on Ash's stone form, and somehow, miraculously, he's restored. He comes back to life, saved by the collective emotional response of the Pokémon around him. What is this depicting? In the Coma Theory context, it's Ash's consciousness flickering toward extinction, toward actual death, and being pulled back by the emotional connection he's built with all the aspects of himself represented by the Pokémon. The tears are grief, yes, but they're also the life force that sustains consciousness. As long as Ash's different aspects care about his survival, as long as there's emotional investment in his continued existence, he can't fully die. He'll be pulled back, restored, allowed to continue the dream. This sets a precedent that's followed throughout the series. Ash faces death or near death multiple times. He's almost drowned, almost frozen, almost burned, almost crushed, almost disintegrated. Each time, something saves him. A Pokémon intervenes, a companion pulls him back, a legendary Pokémon takes an interest. He has plot armor in the most literal sense, protected by the narrative structure of the dream from any outcome that would end the journey. But this protection is also a prison. He can't die, which means he can't escape the dream through death. He can't age, which means he can't move forward through normal development. He can't achieve complete victory, which means he can't conclude the journey and choose what comes next. He's locked in a state of eternal striving, eternal childhood, eternal adventure. And while that sounds appealing in the abstract, like a fantasy come to life, the reality is more complicated. It's a golden cage. It's immortality without agency. It's freedom without consequence. It's everything and nothing at once. The philosophy of the show, when it bothers to articulate one, revolves around friendship, trust, hard work, and kindness. These are good values, healthy values, values that a 10-year-old might have absorbed from parents, teachers, and media before falling into a coma. They're repeated constantly through Ash's actions and words. Trust your Pokémon. Work hard to improve. Be kind to others. Friendship is the strongest power. These mantras sustain the dream by providing moral structure, a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. But notice what's missing from the show's philosophy. There's no discussion of moral ambiguity. There's no complexity about when violence is appropriate. There's no questioning of the fundamental system where creatures are captured and made to fight. There's no examination of death, grief, or loss beyond surface-level sadness that's quickly resolved. The philosophy is child-friendly, which makes sense for a children's show, but also reveals the limitations of Ash's understanding. These are a 10-year-old's ethics, extended across an entire world, never developing into the nuanced moral framework that would come with maturity. As the dream extends across regions and years, some elements become more sophisticated, while others remain stuck at that initial level of understanding. The Pokémon themselves become more varied and complex in design. The battles become more strategic. The legendary Pokémon mythology becomes more intricate. But Ash's core personality remains essentially unchanged. He's still the enthusiastic, naive, kind-hearted kid he was at the beginning. He learns battle techniques but not wisdom. He gains skills but not maturity. He experiences loss but doesn't become jaded. He's in stasis, maintained at a specific developmental stage, because advancing beyond that stage would threaten the dream's stability. This is why some viewers find Ash frustrating as a protagonist after the first few regions. He makes similar mistakes repeatedly. He doesn't seem to retain lessons from past experiences. He approaches each new challenge with the same basic tactics and mindset as previous challenges. He's not stupid, but he's not learning and growing the way a real person would after years of experience. He's a character stuck in a loop, refining certain aspects but unable to fundamentally change, because fundamental change would break the loop. The creators of the show have stated openly that Ash is meant to be eternal, an icon like Mickey Mouse who doesn't age because aging would complicate the show's purpose as entertainment for children. And this is true from a production standpoint, but it's also an accidental perfect description of the Coma Theory. Ash is eternal because he's trapped. He's an icon because he's symbolic rather than real. He doesn't age because aging would require accepting the passage of time, and accepting the passage of time would require acknowledging that time is passing in the real world, that his body is lying in a hospital bed, that he's missing his real life while living this fantasy. When you examine the show through this lens, everything becomes recontextualized. Every adventure is a distraction from reality. Every friendship is a projection of loneliness. Every victory is an attempt to feel accomplished despite the ultimate futility of accomplishing anything in a dream that never ends. Every loss is a reminder that nothing here is permanent except Ash himself. Forever 10, forever traveling, forever chasing a goal he'll never truly achieve, because achieving it would mean waking up. And waking up means confronting whatever waits in the real world. And what waits there, we can only guess. Perhaps Ash's body has recovered somewhat, and waking up would mean starting over with physical therapy, speech therapy, relearning basic functions. Perhaps the damage is severe, and waking up would mean discovering he's disabled, unable to live the active life he dreams of. Perhaps too much time has passed, and waking up would mean discovering he's no longer 10 years old, that years of his life have been stolen by the coma, that everyone he knew has moved on without him. Or perhaps the situation is worse. Perhaps Ash is brain dead, kept alive only by machines. Perhaps his mother, grown old, visiting him every day, is the only one still believing he'll wake up. Perhaps the doctors have been recommending letting him go for years, but she can't, because he's her son, her only child, all she has left. So the machines keep running, the heart keeps beating, the brain maintains minimum activity, and in that minimum activity, Ash Ketchum dreams of being the very best, like no one ever was. The dream continues. It must continue. Because continuing is all Ash knows how to do now. The regions themselves form a map of Ash's deteriorating grasp on reality. Each new region he travels to becomes more fantastical, more divorced from the grounded world of Kanto where everything began. Think about the progression. Kanto feels almost real, with its forests and mountains and cities that could exist in some version of Japan. Johto expands on this foundation, but introduces more mythology, more legendary encounters, more moments where the mundane gives way to the impossible. By the time Ash reaches regions like Kalos or Alola, the world has transformed into something far stranger. Kalos introduces Mega Evolution, a temporary transformation where Pokémon achieve forms beyond their normal evolution, glowing with power before reverting to standard. These transformations require specific stones and deep bonds between trainer and Pokémon. They're spectacular, dramatic, and fundamentally unstable. The Pokémon can't maintain the Mega Evolved form. It's a burst of power that must always collapse back to baseline. This maps perfectly onto Ash's occasional surges toward consciousness, moments where he almost wakes up, almost breaks through to reality, before the dream reasserts itself and pulls him back down into the fantasy. The concept of the fairy type being introduced in Kalos is equally significant. For 5 generations, for years of the anime's runtime, there were only 17 Pokémon types. The system was complete, understood, categorized. Then suddenly, retroactively, there's an 18th type, Fairy. It's super effective against dragon types, which were previously among the most powerful. It recontextualizes dozens of Pokémon, reclassifying them with this new type. Entire strategies must be rewritten to account for this addition. In a real stable world, this would be impossible. You can't just discover a new, fundamental category of existence that was always there but no one noticed. But in a dream that's been running for decades, in a construct that's fraying at the edges, new elements can be introduced retroactively. Ash's subconscious is reaching for new material, new ways to keep the dream interesting and varied. The fairy type represents a shift in understanding, a rewriting of the dream's rules because the old rules have been exhausted through repetition. Alola abandons the traditional gym structure entirely, replacing it with island trials and challenges against kahunas. The familiar pattern that Ash has followed through 6 regions is suddenly gone, replaced with something entirely different. Why? Perhaps because Ash's subconscious can no longer maintain the pretense. The gym challenge has been done so many times across so many regions that continuing it would be too obviously repetitive. So the dream shifts, creates a new structure, maintains novelty through transformation rather than variation. Alola is also where Ash attends school. For the first time in his journey, he's enrolled in an actual institution, attending classes regularly with other students. This is a bizarre shift for someone who's been wandering the wilderness for years or decades depending on how you count time. It's as if Ash's subconscious is trying to recapture something it lost, trying to experience the normal childhood development that was stolen when he fell into the coma. School represents structure, learning, social development in a controlled environment. All things Ash missed when he started his journey at age 10 and never progressed beyond it. The fact that Ash finally becomes a champion in Alola, winning the newly established Pokémon League, feels less like triumph and more like consolation. His subconscious is giving him what he's always wanted, but in a context that diminishes the achievement. It's not the Indigo League he dreamed of conquering in Kanto. It's not even a well-established league with generations of history. It's a brand new league in a region with completely different customs, and Ash wins it primarily because he's helped establish the league itself. He's winning a championship he helped create. The circularity is almost too perfect. He can only win when the dream adjusts its rules to allow victory. The Ultra Beasts that appear in Alola represent intrusions from outside the dream's normal parameters. They come from Ultra Space, from literally another dimension, and they don't follow the rules that govern normal Pokémon. They're alien, incomprehensible, dangerous in ways that normal Pokémon rarely are. Is Ash's subconscious acknowledging that external stimuli are beginning to penetrate the dream? Are the Ultra Beast representations of doctors, family members, or medical equipment in the real world trying to reach him, their presence translated into the dream logic as creatures from another dimension? Galar, the region based on Great Britain, continues the trend toward more fantastical elements. Dynamax and Gigantamax allow Pokémon to grow to enormous sizes temporarily, becoming kaiju that tower over buildings and landscapes. The transformations are even more spectacular than Mega Evolution, even more unstable, and they can only occur in specific locations where energy called Galar particles is concentrated. The geography of the region itself determines what's possible, which again suggests Ash's subconscious is creating increasingly elaborate rules to explain why certain things happen in certain places. The wild area in Galar is particularly significant. It's an open landscape where weather changes constantly, where Pokémon of vastly different power levels coexist, where you might encounter a level 5 Pokémon in the same area as a level 60 Pokémon. This makes no sense from an ecological or game balance perspective, but it makes perfect sense as a representation of Ash's increasingly chaotic mental landscape. The careful level progression of earlier regions is breaking down. Things that should be separated are mixing together. The dream is becoming less stable, less ordered, more subject to random fluctuations. Paldea, the most recent region, introduces terastallization, yet another temporary transformation gimmick. Pokémon can crystallize, changing their type temporarily and gaining power. Every region now has its own unique battle mechanic, its own special way that Pokémon can transcend their normal limitations for brief periods. This escalation suggests desperation, a need to keep introducing novelty because the fundamental pattern has become so worn that it can't sustain interest without these additions. Let's talk about specific Pokémon species and what they represent in Ash's psyche. Pikachu we've covered extensively as his humanity, his core self. But what about the others? Bulbasaur, one of the original starters, represents nurturing and loyalty. It's a grass and poison type, combining growth with defense mechanisms. When Ash catches Bulbasaur, he's integrating the ability to grow while maintaining boundaries, to be open to others while still protecting himself. Bulbasaur often serves as a mediator in Ash's team, breaking up fights between other Pokémon, which reflects this balanced, nurturing aspect. Charizard is passion and pride taken to extremes. As a Charmander, it's vulnerable and in need of rescue. As Charmeleon, it becomes rebellious and difficult. As Charizard, it's powerful but arrogant, often refusing to listen to Ash's commands. This represents Ash's relationship with his own confidence and aggression. When he's vulnerable, these qualities need protection. When they first awaken, they're uncontrolled and turn against him. When they fully develop, they're incredibly powerful but dangerous, requiring careful management to channel productively rather than destructively. Squirtle and the Squirtle Squad represent rebellion and chosen family. The Squirtle Ash catches is part of a gang of abandoned Pokémon who've banded together and turned to mischief and minor crime. When Squirtle joins Ash, it represents integrating that rebellious, independent streak while also acknowledging the value of being part of something larger than yourself. The fact that Squirtle eventually leaves to rejoin and lead the Squirtle Squad, now reformed into firefighters, represents this aspect of Ash finding productive expression separate from his conscious journey. Pidgeot is significant because it's one of the few Pokémon Ash promises to return for, but never does. He leaves it in Viridian Forest to protect the local Pidgey and Pidgeotto from Spearow attacks. He explicitly says he'll come back for it when the job is done, but he never returns. Years pass within the dream's time, regions come and go, and Pidgey remains waiting in that forest. What does this represent? Perhaps an abandoned aspect of self, a quality or capability that Ash promised he'd return to and develop further but never did. Perhaps a responsibility he took on but couldn't maintain. The fact that Pidgeot is protecting others from Spearow, the same species that caused Ash's original accident, suggests it's related to trauma and the need to protect others from similar harm. Lapras is the gentle giant, the water and ice type that Ash helps rescue from abuse, and then travels with extensively in the Orange Islands. It represents compassion and the capacity for grace despite suffering. When Ash releases Lapras to rejoin its family pod, it's an acknowledgement that this gentle, empathetic aspect has healed enough to return to the collective, to be part of a community rather than isolated with Ash. But like Pidgeot, Lapras's release feels premature, motivated more by the dream's need to reset Ash's team than by natural narrative conclusion. Greninja and Kalos become something entirely unique. It develops a transformation called Ash Greninja, where the Pokémon literally takes on aspects of Ash's appearance when they battle together. Their bond is so strong that they share sensation and pain, When Greninja is hit, Ash feels it. This is the most explicit representation of Pokémon as extensions of self that the show has ever presented. Ash Greninja isn't just Ash's Pokémon, it's Ash, externalized, battling in Pokémon form. The transformation is powerful but exhausting, and it requires perfect synchronization. When they fall out of sync, both Ash and Greninja suffer. The fact that this unprecedented bond is eventually broken, with Greninja left behind in Kalos to protect the region's ecosystem, is heartbreaking within the narrative and deeply significant symbolically. Ash achieved the closest possible bond with an aspect of himself, literally merging consciousness during battle, and then had to separate from it. This could represent Ash's realization that some forms of integration are too intense, too consuming. Merging completely with an aspect of self might feel powerful, but it's ultimately unsustainable. Balance requires separation, boundaries, the ability to be distinct even while connected. The concept of regional variance, introduced in Alola, adds another layer to the symbolism. Certain Pokémon have different forms depending on which region they come from. Alolan Vulpix is Ice type instead of Fire type. Alolan Exeggutor is absurdly tall with a long neck. Alolan Raichu is Psychic type in addition to Electric. The environment shapes the Pokémon, creating variations on the same base species. This represents how context shapes aspects of personality. The same basic trait might express differently depending on circumstances, environment, or the other aspects it's interacting with. Ash's confidence might manifest as determination in one situation and stubbornness in another. His compassion might be nurturing in one context and enabling in another. His Hisuian forms, regional variants from the ancient past of the Sinnoh region, take this concept further. These aren't just environmental variations, they're temporal variations, Pokémon from hundreds of years ago that have different forms from their modern counterparts. This introduces the idea that aspects of self have histories, that they've evolved and changed over time within the psyche. The Hisuian variants are often more aggressive, more primal, representing earlier, less refined versions of traits that have since become more civilized or controlled. The ghost-type Pokémon that appear throughout Ash's journey are particularly unsettling. Ghosts represent death, the boundary between life and not life, the things that linger after they should be gone. Haunter pulls Ash's soul from his body. Gengar appears in multiple contexts, often associated with shadows and parallel dimensions. Spiritomb is formed from bound spirits. Giratina dwells in the distortion world, a dimension that's the reverse of normal reality. Marshadow lurks in shadows, observing without being observed. Each ghost type that Ash encounters is his subconscious poking at the boundary between his dream existence and whatever lies beyond. Ghosts don't belong fully in the living world, just as Ash doesn't belong fully in the dream world or the real world anymore. He's caught between existing in a liminal state that ghost types embody. The fact that many ghost types are portrayed as playful or mischievous rather than malevolent suggests that this liminal existence isn't entirely negative. There can be freedom in not being fully bound to either reality. Dark-type Pokémon, introduced in Johto, represent Ash's shadow self more directly than the Team Rocket trio. They're associated with fighting dirty, with tactics that are considered underhanded or cruel. Dark-type moves often involve biting, stealing, or exploiting the opponent's weaknesses in ways that feel morally questionable. Ash uses Dark-type Pokémon occasionally, but he rarely seems comfortable with them the way he is with other types. This represents his discomfort with his own capacity for cruelty, manipulation, or exploitation. He possesses these capabilities. They're part of his psychological makeup, but he doesn't like acknowledging them or seeing them in himself. Psychic-type Pokémon are intelligence, intuition, and the mind's power made manifest. They can levitate, teleport, read thoughts, see the future. They represent everything Ash wishes his mind could do. If he could levitate, he could escape his body. If he could teleport, he could transcend the limitations of physical space. If he could read thoughts, he could understand others perfectly. If he could see the future, he could find the way out of his situation. But psychic types are also fragile in many cases, physically weak, vulnerable to physical attacks and to their own dark counterparts. Pure intellect without emotional grounding or physical capability is powerful but incomplete. Dragon-type Pokémon are the apex, the pinnacle, the ultimate achievement for many trainers within the show. They're rare, powerful, difficult to train, and often legendary. Iris becomes a Dragon-type specialist, and eventually a champion. Lance of the Elite Four specializes in Dragon types. Claire, the final gym leader in Johto, uses Dragon types as her final test. Dragons represent the ultimate aspects of self, the most developed and powerful qualities that require immense effort to cultivate and control. The fact that fairy types are super effective against dragons, that the innocent and whimsical can defeat the powerful and established, suggests that sometimes returning to simpler, purer qualities is more effective than pure power. The legendary Pokémon trios and duos that structure each region's mythology represent different philosophical or psychological dichotomies. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are ice, electricity, and fire, representing different emotional states and responses. Cold calculation, energetic action, passionate intensity. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune are thunder, fire, and water, perhaps representing the mind, the body, and the spirit. Regirock, Regice, and Registeel are ancient golems of earth, ice, and steel, representing different forms of defense and rigidity. The Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, represent knowledge, emotion, and willpower respectively. These are the three fundamental aspects of consciousness according to the Sinnoh mythology. Knowledge is understanding, the capacity to learn and comprehend. Emotion is feeling, the capacity to experience and care. Willpower is determination, the capacity to choose and act. Without any one of these three, consciousness would be incomplete. Ash encounters all three during his Sinnoh journey, suggesting his subconscious is examining the fundamental components of his own awareness. Dialga and Palkia, the temporal and spatial Pokémon, represent Ash's two biggest problems. Time doesn't flow correctly in his world. He doesn't age. Events don't follow chronological logic. Dialga, who controls time, appearing in his dream, is his mind acknowledging this fundamental issue. Space doesn't work correctly either. Distances are inconsistent. Locations appear and disappear based on narrative need rather than geography. Palkia, who controls space, represents this spatial incoherence. The fact that both these Pokémon are caught in conflict when Ash encounters them in the movies suggests that time and space are at war within his psyche, neither able to establish stable rules. Arceus, the supposed creator of everything, the god of the Pokémon universe, is Ash's mind itself, the original source. the thing that created this entire construct. When Arceus appears in Ash's journey and judges him, tests him, it's his deepest subconscious examining his conscious self, asking whether he's worthy of continued existence in this form. The fact that Arceus is impossibly powerful, able to create and destroy reality with a thought, but is also wounded and needs Ash's help in the movie, represents the paradox of consciousness. The mind creates everything we experience, is literally omnipotent within our subjective reality, yet it's also fragile, vulnerable to trauma and damage, dependent on the ego's cooperation to maintain itself. The weather patterns in different regions reflect Ash's emotional states and the stability of his mental environment. Kanto has mild weather, occasional rain, nothing extreme. This is the stable baseline, the dream still grounded in something resembling normal reality. Hoenn introduces constant rain on certain routes, volcanic ash falling from Mant Chimney, harsh sunlight and drought conditions. The weather becomes a character in itself, affecting battles and travel, representing how emotional states can dominate entire areas of experience. Sinnoh has routes with constant hail and snow, areas where visibility is almost zero. The northern region is harsh, cold, unforgiving, representing perhaps the emotional aftermath of years in the coma, a creeping coldness and numbness. Unova has seasonal variation, with the player or trainer experiencing all 4 seasons during their journey. This could represent cycles of mood, the natural progression through different emotional states over time, none permanent, all recurring. The routes themselves, the numbered paths between locations, are repetitive by design. Every region has routes. Every route has grass where wild Pokémon hide. Every route has trainers who want to battle. The structure is comforting in its predictability, but it's also deadening. Nothing fundamentally new happens on routes. They're connective tissue, necessary to maintain the geography but not interesting in themselves. This maps onto depression's numbing effect. How much of existence becomes going through the motions, traveling from point to point without the journey itself having much meaning. The caves deserve special attention. Ash's journey takes him through countless caves. Dark Cave, Mint Moon, Rock Tunnel, Victory Road, Meteor Falls, Mint Coronet, Chargestone Cave, Reflection Cave, the list goes on and on. Caves are spaces of darkness, enclosed spaces, places where you can easily become lost. They're claustrophobic, disorienting, filled with wild Pokémon that are often more aggressive than surface encounters. Caves represent the unconscious mind, the dark places where Ash must venture to make progress, but which are fundamentally uncomfortable and threatening. The fact that Flash, a move that illuminates dark caves, is often necessary to navigate these spaces suggests that insight, bringing light to darkness, is required to move through these unconscious territories. But even with Flash, caves remain unsettling. You can illuminate them, but you can't eliminate the fundamental nature of being underground, enclosed, separated from the sky and freedom. Some aspects of the unconscious remain dark even when examined directly. Mint Silver, the mountain that connects Kanto and Johto, that's home to the most powerful wild Pokémon. That's where Red supposedly waits in the games, represents the peak of psychological development, the highest point, the most challenging climb. In the anime, Mint Silver is mentioned but never fully explored by Ash. He approaches it but doesn't conquer it. This mountain remains aspirational, always ahead of him. always representing a level of integration or consciousness he hasn't achieved. Perhaps meant Silver's waking up. Perhaps it's the ultimate challenge that would end the dream, and so Ash's journey carefully avoids fully confronting it. The oceans and seas that Ash crosses represent the collective unconscious, the vast depths that connect all minds, all experiences. Water routes often feature Pokémon that are otherwise rare or absent on land. Diving beneath the surface reveals entire ecosystems. Underwater areas contain ancient secrets, forgotten civilizations, legendary Pokémon resting in the depths. The ocean is where individual psychology connects to something larger, where personal experience touches universal patterns. The fact that Ash frequently travels by boat, riding on the surface without exploring the depths very thoroughly, suggests his engagement with the collective, unconscious, is limited. He skims across the surface, occasionally diving down when necessary, but doesn't live in these depths the way he lives on the land routes. He's focused on his individual journey, rather than exploring what connects his experience to broader human experience. This makes sense for a coma patient whose dream is primarily self-focused, constructed from his own limited life experience, rather than tapping into deeper archetypal material. The various forms of transportation available in Ash's world reveal how he thinks about progress and movement. Walking is primary. Ash walks most places, covering vast distances on foot with his companions. This is the slow, steady, grounded form of progress. You move forward through consistent effort, step by step, seeing everything along the way. It's the most honest form of travel in some sense, engaging directly with the landscape and the journey. Bicycles appear frequently, but usually end up destroyed or abandoned. Misty's bike is destroyed in the first episode and becomes a running gag. Ash receives bikes in other regions that similarly get wrecked or left behind. Bikes represent faster progress, efficiency, mechanical assistance. But they're fragile, dependent on infrastructure like paths and repairs. They break easily in Ash's world, suggesting that mechanical solutions to psychological journeys are ultimately unsustainable. Flying on Pokémon is available, but used sparingly. The ability to simply fly over obstacles, to skip routes, and go directly to destinations would undermine the journey's purpose. So despite many Pokémon being capable of flight, despite the move Fly being readily teachable, Ash rarely uses this method of travel for more than specific obstacles. If progress were too easy, if challenges could be simply avoided, the dream would lose its structuring narrative. Trains appear in some regions, particularly the magnet train between Kanto and Johto. Trains represent societal infrastructure, collective progress, moving along predetermined paths at high speed. Ash uses trains occasionally, but they're never his primary method of travel. They're too impersonal, too divorced from the journey's immediate experience. You board, you wait, you arrive, without engaging with the space between. For someone whose entire existence is defined by the journey itself, trains are antithetical to the dream's purpose. Ships and boats are more common, used to cross oceans and reach island locations. They represent transition between psychological states, moving from one region of the psyche to another. The time spent on ships is often compressed, summarized, or skipped entirely. What happens during ocean crossings isn't as important as the departure and arrival. This suggests that the process of transitioning between major psychological territories is less interesting to Ash's subconscious than the territories themselves. The Pokémon centers that appear in every town are identical not just in staffing but in layout and function. They all have the same curved desk, the same healing machines, the same overnight accommodations. This uniformity is eerie when you think about it. In a real world, buildings would vary based on local architecture, resources, budget, culture. But in Ash's dream, Pokémon centers are copies of each other, a template repeated endlessly. They represent the one completely safe space in the dream, the place where healing always happens, where rest is always available, where Nurse Joy always offers unconditional support. The healing process itself is nearly instantaneous. Nurse Joy takes your Pokémon, places them in a machine, waits a few seconds, and returns them fully healed, regardless of how injured they were. This is fantasy healing, wish fulfillment healing, the kind of recovery that a traumatized child would dream about. No long rehabilitation, no permanent damage, no painful procedures, just instant restoration to perfect health. It's the healing Ash can't have in the real world, so he creates it in the dream and makes it universally available. The repetitive nature of battles becomes more apparent the longer you watch the series. Ash fights wild Pokémon and catches them. Ash fights trainers on routes for experience. Ash fights gym leaders for badges. Ash fights rivals for pride and development. Ash fights criminal teams to save the day. Ash fights in leagues to prove himself. Every conflict is resolved through battle. Every challenge is met with a Pokémon battle. There's no political solution. There's no compromise or negotiation beyond the occasional episode where talking resolves a misunderstanding before battle happens. This reliance on battle as the ultimate arbiter reflects a child's understanding of conflict resolution. Problems are solved through contests of strength and skill. The stronger or smarter or luckier combatant wins. There's minimal ambiguity. Even when battles are close, there's always a winner and a loser. This binary simplicity is comforting in its clarity, but also limiting. Real-life conflicts rarely have such clean resolutions. Real life often requires compromise, accepting partial victories, living with unresolved tensions. But Ash's dream can't handle that complexity, so everything gets filtered through the battle system. The move pools that Pokémon possess follow interesting patterns. Some moves are straightforward attacks: Tackle, Scratch, Flamethrower, Thunderbolt. They do damage of specific types with varying power levels. These represent direct approaches to challenges, meeting problems head-on with force. Other moves are status effects: Paralyze, Poison, Sleep, Confusion. They don't do direct damage, but they impair the opponent, making them easier to defeat later. These represent indirect approaches, undermining challenges rather than confronting them directly. Some moves affect stats, raising the user's attack or defense or speed, or lowering the opponent's. These represent self-improvement and opponent analysis, recognizing that victory often comes from being slightly better in key areas rather than overwhelmingly powerful. Some moves affect the battlefield itself, creating weather effects or terrain changes that benefit certain types while hindering others. These represent environmental manipulation, changing the context of conflict to favor your strengths. The fact that Pokémon can only know 4 moves at a time, despite being capable of learning dozens of moves over their lifetime, represents limitation and choice. You can't be good at everything. You must choose your specializations, decide which capabilities to maintain and which to let atrophy. The move deleter and move relearner NPCs that appear in games allow changing these choices, but in the anime moves seem more permanent once learned. Ash's Pokémon have signature moves they use repeatedly, defining their combat identity. This suggests that once you've integrated certain capabilities, they become core to how you operate, difficult to replace or forget. The type effectiveness system that governs battles is the dream's moral framework made mechanical. Fire beats grass but loses to water. Water beats fire but loses to electric. Electric beats water but loses to ground. Everything has strengths and weaknesses. Everything is both powerful and vulnerable depending on context. This is a more sophisticated understanding than simple good versus evil, acknowledging that traits that are advantages in one situation become disadvantages in another. The fact that some Pokémon have two types, creating more complex relationships with effectiveness, represents people as combinations of traits rather than single characteristics. A Pokémon that's both grass and poison has the strengths and weaknesses of both types, creating a more nuanced, strategic identity. This maps onto human psychology's reality that we're combinations of sometimes contradictory traits, simultaneously possessing qualities that conflict or complement each other. Abilities, another mechanical system where each Pokémon has a special trait that passively affects battles, represent inherent qualities beyond trained skills. Some Pokémon's abilities make them immune to certain status effects. Some abilities increase power in specific conditions. Some abilities affect opponents just by being present. These are the personality traits you're born with or develop so early they feel innate. They're not skills you practice, they're fundamental aspects of who you are that color everything else. Hidden abilities, rare variants that some Pokémon possess, represent undiscovered aspects of self, potentials that aren't immediately obvious. Most Pokémon have standard abilities that everyone with that species shares, but some have alternatives that only appear under special circumstances or through special encounters. These hidden abilities are often more powerful or more interesting than standard abilities, representing capabilities you didn't know you had until something forced them to surface. The nature system, where each Pokémon has a nature that slightly boosts one stat while decreasing another, represents fundamental personality dispositions. Adamant nature increases attack, but decreases special attack, representing someone who's physically assertive, but not verbally or intellectually aggressive. Modest nature does the opposite, increasing special attack, but decreasing physical attack, representing someone comfortable with intellectual or verbal force but not physical confrontation. The game features 25 different natures, creating a taxonomy of personality dispositions that affect how the Pokémon develops. Shiny Pokémon, alternate colorations that appear extremely rarely, represent moments of unexpected beauty or uniqueness in the psyche. They're mechanically identical to normal Pokémon but visually distinct. Encountering a shiny Pokémon in the wild is exciting precisely because it's rare and unexpected. In Ash's dream, shiny Pokémon appear occasionally but never become a major focus. They're acknowledged as special but not pursed obsessively. This suggests Ash's mind appreciates uniqueness and rarity but doesn't fetishize it, doesn't build his identity around possessing rare things. The held items system, where Pokémon can carry items that provide various benefits during battle, represents tools and resources that enhance capability. Some items heal over time, some items boost specific types of moves, some items trigger under specific conditions, like activating when health drops low. The fact that Pokémon can only hold one item at a time represents limitation of resources. You must choose which tool to rely on, which enhancement to prioritize. You can't have all benefits simultaneously. Evolutionary stones, items that trigger evolution in certain Pokémon when used, represent catalysts for growth. Some Pokémon won't evolve naturally through experience and battle. They need a specific trigger, a specific resource, a specific external push. This maps onto how some aspects of personality won't develop through normal life experience. They need specific interventions, specific insights, specific moments of decision to advance to their next stage. Trading, the mechanic where Pokémon must be exchanged between trainers to evolve, represents growth through relationship and exchange. Some aspects of yourself can't develop in isolation. They need interaction with others, need to be temporarily given away and then returned changed. In the anime, this is rare and usually traumatic. Ash hates trading his Pokémon away even temporarily. This suggests his isolation within the coma, his inability to truly exchange aspects of self with others because there are no real others, only projections. The baby Pokémon introduced in Johto, pre-evolutions of established species that can only be obtained through breeding, represent earlier developmental stages. Pichu before Pikachu, Elekid before Electabuzz, Magby before Magmar. These babies add depth to the evolutionary lines, showing that even powerful Pokémon start from helpless infancy. They also create the question of breeding, of reproduction, of where new Pokémon come from. The anime addresses this minimally, showing Pokémon eggs appearing, but rarely explaining the process in detail. This vagueness around reproduction reflects Ash's age when the coma began. He was 10. He wouldn't understand reproduction fully, so the dream glosses over it, acknowledges eggs exist, but doesn't examine the mechanics too closely. The daycare centers that appear in various regions, places where Pokémon can be left to grow stronger and potentially produce eggs, represent aspects of self being developed passively while attention is elsewhere. You leave part of yourself there, focus on other things, and when you return, that aspect has grown without your active involvement. It's unconscious development, the growth that happens below the surface of awareness while consciousness is occupied with other challenges. The Pokémon storage system, where Ash's Pokémon not in his active party are sent to Professor Oak's lab, represents aspects of self that aren't currently active but remain accessible. You can't use all your integrated qualities simultaneously. Most stay in the background, called upon when specifically needed. The fact that Ash can access any stored Pokémon through a PC, instantly transferring them from Oak's lab to wherever he is, represents the fantasy that all developed aspects of self are immediately available if needed. In reality, qualities that haven't been practiced atrophy, skills that aren't maintained fade, but in the dream, everything you've integrated remains perfectly preserved, ready for deployment. Ash's rotating team composition, how he constantly switches which Pokémon travel with him and which stay with Oak, represents shifting focus between different aspects of personality. Sometimes he needs his fire type, his passion and aggression. Sometimes he needs his grass type, his capacity for growth and healing. Sometimes he needs his psychic type, his intellect and intuition. The team changes based on what challenges he's facing, which is realistic. But the ease of switching, the lack of consequences for constantly changing who's with him, is pure fantasy. Real psychological integration means committing to certain qualities, building on them, accepting that you can't optimize for every possible situation. The episodes where Ash's Pokémon at Oak's lab are shown interacting with each other, living their lives without him, are fascinating. His Tauros herd stampedes around, his Bayleaf pines for him, his Kingler plays in the pond. These Pokémon have existence independent of Ash's direct attention. They're not in stasis when he's not using them. They're alive, active, continuing their own development. This represents the complexity of the psyche, how different aspects of self continue operating even when not consciously attended to. Your compassion doesn't vanish when you're being analytical. Your aggression doesn't disappear when you're being nurturing. All traits remain active in the background, ready to emerge when circumstances trigger them. The rivals that appear throughout Ash's journey each represent different possible selves, different paths he could have taken. Gary Oak is the successful, confident self. Paul is the ruthless, ambitious self. Trip is the dismissive, superior self. Alain is the powerful, isolated self. Each rival shows Ash what he could become if he emphasized different qualities, pursued different values, made different choices. Defeating these rivals in battle represents rejecting those alternative selves, choosing his current path over alternatives, but never completely defeating them, never eliminating them entirely, represents acknowledging that those possibilities remain open, those potential selves still exist within him. The way rivals often become friends or allies after being defeated repeatedly is significant. Gary stops being antagonistic and becomes supportive. Paul's harsh methods are tempered through interaction with Ash. They don't remain enemies. They don't disappear after being bested. They're integrated, brought into the collective of people who respect and care about Ash. This represents the integration of shadow qualities, bringing rejected aspects of self into relationship rather than keeping them oppositional. The rival who becomes a friend is the alternative self that's been acknowledged and incorporated, rather than repressed and denied. The recurring appearance of certain Pokémon across multiple regions, like how Pikachu's species appears everywhere despite being noted as rare in early episodes, represents how certain aspects of self feel omnipresent once you've acknowledged them. Before you recognize a trait, you don't see it. After you recognize it, you see it everywhere. Pikachu is rare until Ash has one, and then suddenly Pikachu are common enough that he encounters them regularly. This is confirmation bias made manifest in the dream structure, the world arranging itself around Ash's current awareness. The contest spectacular system and the Pokémon performance system that appear in various regions represent alternative paths of achievement beyond battle. Some people train Pokémon to be beautiful or cool or cute in performances rather than powerful in battle. This represents achievement through expression and artistry rather than dominance and victory. Ash occasionally participates but never commits fully to contests, representing his primary orientation toward direct challenge and growth through conflict rather than growth through refinement and presentation. the bond phenomenon that appears in some regions, where trainers and Pokémon can sense each other's emotions and intentions without words, represents the ideal relationship between conscious will and unconscious capability. When Ash achieves this bond with Pokémon like Greninja or Lucario, they become extensions of his will, responding to his intent before he verbalizes commands. This is what perfect psychological integration would feel like. Different aspects of self responding harmoniously to conscious intent without lag or miscommunication, united toward common goals. The fact that these perfect bonds are always temporary or ultimately broken represents the reality that perfect integration is an ideal rarely achieved and never permanently maintained. Even when Ash achieves this level of connection, circumstances eventually force separation, or the bond proves unsustainable. This reflects wisdom about psychological health. Integration is a process, not a destination. You approach it, touch it briefly, then fall back into normal separation, and must work toward it again. The professors that appear in each region, Professor Oak, Professor Elm, Professor Birch, Professor Rowan, and others, represent authority figures and sources of knowledge. They're always supportive of Ash, always believing in him, always providing resources when needed. They're idealized mentors, the wise guides a child would want. They don't challenge him harshly, they don't withdraw support when he fails. They're unconditionally encouraging while also representing deep knowledge and expertise. This is the fantasy relationship with authority, being supported and believed in without being controlled or constrained. The evil team leaders, Giovanni, Maxie, Archie, Cyrus, Getsis, and others, represent negative authority figures, the ways authority can be corrupt, destructive, or misguided. They're powerful but wrong, capable but cruel, charismatic but deceptive. They represent Ash's awareness that not all authority is benevolent, that power can be misused, that you can't trust everyone who claims to be a leader. Defeating these leaders represents resisting corrupt authority, refusing to submit to power that isn't legitimate despite its apparent strength. The fact that these evil leaders often have understandable motivations makes them more complex than simple villains. Cyrus wants to create a world without emotion because emotion causes suffering. Getsis claims to want liberation for Pokémon from human control. Their goals come from legitimate critiques of the world's structure, but their methods are extreme, destructive, tyrannical. This represents the reality that even negative aspects of personality often arise from understandable sources. Cynicism comes from being hurt. Aggression comes from feeling threatened. Rigidity comes from needing control. Understanding the source doesn't excuse the behavior, but it makes integration more possible than simple repression. The world-threatening crises that Ash resolves in movies and special episodes, stopping meteorites, preventing legendary Pokémon from destroying everything, averting dimensional collapses, represent ego death threats. These are moments where the entire structure of the dream is at risk, where the construct threatens to collapse. Ash must intervene, must save the world, because the world is his mind, and if it collapses, he collapses with it. These crises are always resolved not through power, but through compassion, understanding, and sacrifice. Ash typically doesn't defeat the threat through force. He transforms it through empathy, finding the suffering beneath the destruction and addressing that instead. This pattern reveals the dream's core wisdom. Psychological wholeness comes through understanding and integration, not through suppression and dominance. When Ash faces world-ending threats, fighting harder doesn't work. What works is understanding why the threat exists, addressing the underlying pain or imbalance, bringing the destructive element back into harmony with the whole. This is sophisticated psychological insight embedded in children's entertainment, the recurring theme of Pokémon and humans living together in harmony. The show's idealized vision of coexistence represents Ash's desire for integration of all aspects of self into peaceful cooperation. There's no war between consciousness and unconsciousness in this vision. There's no irreconcilable conflict between different personality traits. Everything can work together. The human trainers and the Pokémon partners can achieve perfect synergy. This is aspirational rather than realistic, but aspiration has value. The dream shows Ash what wholeness would look like even if he can't achieve it, giving him something to work toward. The moments of genuine peace in the show, where Ash and friends sit by a campfire cooking food, or rest in a field watching Pokémon play, or simply walk through beautiful landscapes without immediate conflict, are the dream at its most effective. These are moments of respite, of contentment, of simple existence without struggle. They're what makes the journey worthwhile, what gives meaning to all the battles and challenges. They're moments where Ash can simply be, without striving, without proving anything, without needing to become anything other than what he is. These moments are the closest the dream comes to true healing. And so the dream continues, year after year, region after region. Ash Ketchum remains 10 years old, traveling with Pikachu by his side, making new friends, facing new challenges, pursuing a goal that recedes endlessly before him like a horizon that can never be reached. The doctors check his vitals, the machines continue their steady rhythm. His mother sits beside his bed and tells him about her day, about how proud she would be of him, about how she knows he's going to wake up soon. She's been saying this for years, maybe decades. She hasn't stopped believing because stopping would mean accepting the unacceptable. In the dream, Ash doesn't know any of this. He knows only the journey, the next town, the next gym badge, the next rival to overcome, the next crisis to resolve, the next friend to make, the next Pokémon to catch. The world keeps generating content, keeps providing challenges, keeps him occupied and distracted from the fundamental questions that, if examined too closely, would shatter the entire construct. Why doesn't he age? Why does time flow so strangely? Why do people appear and disappear from his life with such regularity? Why does the journey never truly end? But these questions arise only when you step outside the dream and examine it from the perspective of reality. From within the dream, everything makes perfect sense. The logic is self-consistent. The world has its own rules, and those rules work. Ash never questions them because questioning would threaten the dream's integrity, would risk the kind of lucidity that leads to waking. So he accepts, he trusts, he continues forward step by step, battle by battle, badge by badge, league by league, region by region, an endless recursion of the same fundamental pattern with infinite variations. The theory suggests that this is a tragedy. A boy trapped in his own mind, unable to wake, living out an elaborate fantasy while his real life slips away. A mother keeping vigil beside a hospital bed, watching her son's body age, even as his mind remains locked at age 10, experiencing adventures she can only imagine. Doctors who've long since given up hope of meaningful recovery, but maintain care because stopping would be admitting defeat. A life that could have been stolen by a single moment of bad luck, a bike crash, a lightning strike, a flock of angry birds. But is it entirely tragedy? Within the dream, Ash is happy. He has purpose, he has friends, he has adventures, he saves the world repeatedly. He achieves things that would be impossible in mundane reality. He bonds with creatures of wonder and power. He travels to places of beauty and strangeness. He never experiences the disappointments of normal life, the grinding monotony of work and bills and compromise. He never loses his enthusiasm, his optimism, his belief that anything is possible if you try hard enough and care deeply enough. He remains in many ways in paradise, a paradise of his own creation, yes. A paradise that's also a prison, true, but paradise nonetheless. The question becomes, is a beautiful dream preferable to a difficult reality? If Ash were to wake up, what would he wake up to? A damaged body, a damaged brain, lost years, a world that moved on without him. The knowledge that his adventures, his friendships, his achievements were all illusions, that Pikachu doesn't exist, that Pokémon aren't real, that he never actually accomplished anything beyond surviving in a coma. Would waking up be a relief, or would it be the true tragedy, destroying the one place where he was whole and capable and heroic? The theory doesn't answer this question. It can't. It simply observes that the world Ash inhabits has all the characteristics of a coma dream, that the evidence points toward this interpretation, that the pieces fit too perfectly to be coincidental. Whether this is better or worse than reality is a philosophical question without a clear answer. Some might say any life, even a difficult one, is preferable to living in delusion. Others might argue that if the delusion is complete, if the dreamer never knows they're dreaming, then the dream is their reality and judging it by external standards is meaningless. Ash's story, viewed through this lens, becomes a meditation on consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality itself. What makes something real? Is it physical existence in a material world, or is it the subjective experience of existence, regardless of the substrate that generates that experience? Ash experiences his journey. He feels emotions, makes choices, forms relationships, grows as a person within the dream's context. Are these experiences less valid because they occur in a mind rather than in consensus reality? The Pokémon themselves, these impossible creatures with impossible abilities, represent everything wondrous about imagination. They're what makes the world magical rather than mundane. They're proof that in the realm of mind, anything can exist, any rule can be broken, any impossibility can become possible. A mouse that generates electricity, a turtle that shoots water with enough force to break rock, a plant that can poison, heal, and entangle, a dragon that can manipulate time, a god that can create reality with a thought. These things don't exist in the material world, but they exist in the dream, and in the dream, they're as real as anything else. Perhaps that's the deepest truth the theory reveals, that human consciousness is capable of creating entire worlds, complete with consistent rules, diverse inhabitants, complex narratives, and genuine emotion. The coma patient lying in that hospital bed, if that's what Ash truly is, isn't just surviving, isn't just maintaining minimum brain function. That patient is creating, is authoring, is world building on a scale that would take teams of writers and artists years to accomplish consciously. The unconscious mind, given the right circumstances and the need to protect itself, can generate complexity and beauty that rivals any deliberately created fiction. And maybe, in the end, that's what makes us human, not our bodies, which are just biological machines that can be damaged and broken, not our memories, which can be lost or distorted, but our capacity to create meaning, to tell stories, to generate experience and structure, even in the absence of external input. Ash's coma dream, if that's what it is, represents the human mind at its most resilient and its most creative. Faced with trauma and damage, faced with a body that can't respond, and a world that's become inaccessible, the mind retreats inward and builds something new, something complete, something that allows consciousness to continue, experience to persist, identity to maintain itself even when all normal anchors have been severed. The regions Ash travels through are memory palaces, psychological territories, stages of processing and integration. The Pokémon are aspects of self, externalized and given form so they can be examined, trained, evolved. The companions are different parts of his personality, allowed to have voices and agency. The battles are internal conflicts made external. The victories are small moments of integration and growth. The journey is the therapeutic process itself, the mind healing itself through metaphor and narrative, working through trauma and limitation in the only way available to it. In this interpretation, the theory becomes less dark and more profound. Yes, Ash is trapped. Yes, his real body lies motionless somewhere. Yes, his real life is on hold or over. But his mind hasn't given up. His consciousness hasn't surrendered. It's fighting to maintain itself, to continue existing, to process and understand and grow even without normal sensory input or physical capability. The dream is an act of defiance against oblivion, a refusal to let trauma have the final word. As long as the dream continues, as long as Ash keeps traveling, keeps striving, keeps believing in his goal, then consciousness persists. And persistence, in the face of everything that could extinguish it, is itself a kind of heroism. The fact that we can examine this dream, can analyze its symbolism, can recognize its patterns, suggests that Ash's unconscious is sophisticated, organized, purposeful. This isn't random neural firing. This isn't chaos. This is structure. This is narrative. This is a mind that, even in extremity, maintains the capacity for coherent experience and meaningful progression. The dream has rules. It has cause and effect. It has character development and emotional arcs. It has themes and motifs that repeat and develop across thousands of episodes and multiple story arcs. That kind of consistency requires intelligence, requires the organizing principle of consciousness working to maintain itself against entropy. So perhaps the theory, rather than being a depressing reinterpretation of a beloved children's show, is actually a testament to the indomitable nature of consciousness. Perhaps Ash's eternal journey, his refusal to age, his continuous striving toward an impossible goal, is the most human thing imaginable. We're all trapped in the substrates of our minds, experiencing reality only through the filter of neural activity. Ash's substrate happens to be damaged. His filter happens to be generating content internally rather than processing external input. But the experience of being Ash, of being a consciousness on a journey, of seeking meaning and connection and achievement, that's fundamentally the same whether you're in a hospital bed or walking down the street. The theory asks us to consider what matters most, the hardware or the software, the body or the mind, the physical journey or the internal experience of journeying. And it suggests that perhaps the internal experience is what's most real, most important, most essentially human. Ash's body might be broken, but Ash himself, the consciousness that bears that name, continues. And in continuing, in refusing to stop, in building worlds and friendships and meaning out of electrical impulses and damaged neural tissue, consciousness proves its primacy, its resilience, its fundamental worth. This is the story the theory tells. This is the interpretation it offers. A boy in a coma, dreaming of Pokémon, is simultaneously a tragedy and a triumph, a loss and a transformation, an ending and a continuation. He's trapped but free, limited but infinite, isolated but connected to projections of companionship and love. He's everything and nothing, everywhere and nowhere, eternally 10 years old and somehow ageless. He's Ash Ketchum, forever on a journey to be the very best, like no one ever was. And as long as the machines keep running, as long as the brain maintains minimum activity, as long as consciousness persists in any form, the journey continues. The dream goes on, the adventure never ends. And maybe that's not the worst fate imaginable. Maybe there are worse things than eternal childhood, eternal striving, eternal possibility. Maybe being trapped in a beautiful dream is preferable to being trapped in an ugly reality. Maybe Ash, wherever he truly is, in whatever state he truly exists, has found something many people spend their entire conscious lives searching for: purpose, adventure, friendship, and a world where caring and trying are always enough, where the good guys always win eventually, where legendary Pokémon actually exist and will appear to those pure of heart, where eternal happiness isn't just promised but delivered. Sweet dreams, Ash Ketchum. May your journey never end. May your Pikachu never leave your side. May you catch them all, whatever catching them all means, in the endless recursion of your eternal quest. May the dream hold. May consciousness persist. May the boy in the hospital bed, if that's what you are, continue experiencing wonder and triumph and growth, even as the body lies still. You are proof that mind transcends matter, that consciousness creates reality, that imagination is the most powerful force in existence. You are forever 10. You are forever traveling. You are forever becoming the very best. And that, in its own way, is immortality. The theory stands complete, the interpretation offered, the symbolism decoded. Everything in Ash's world pointing toward this single conclusion, that what we're watching isn't an anime about a boy and his Pokémon, but a documentary of consciousness maintaining itself against impossible odds, creating entire worlds from the raw material of memory and imagination, refusing to surrender to trauma or limitation, or the entropy that threatens to extinguish all complex systems. It's beautiful, it's heartbreaking, it's disturbing, it's inspiring. It's all of these things at once, which is appropriate, because consciousness itself is all of these things. Complex, contradictory, resilient beyond belief. And now, having traveled this far into the dream, having examined its structures and symbols, having seen how perfectly every element fits the theory, having accepted this interpretation as the truth of Ash's existence, it's time to wake up. Because here's what's also true. None of this is real. Not Ash's coma. Not the elaborate psychological interpretation. not the symbolic framework that explains every detail of the show. The Pokémon anime is exactly what it appears to be. A children's television show designed to sell video games and merchandise. Ash doesn't age because aging the protagonist would complicate the show's appeal to its target demographic. Time doesn't flow consistently because episodic television doesn't require consistent timelines. Characters come and go because voice actors change, because storylines conclude, because variety maintains audience interest. The Coma Theory, as compelling as it is, as perfectly as all the pieces seem to fit, is a construction. It's a narrative we've built, you and I, over the last few hours. It's a way of finding meaning and pattern in something that was never designed to have this level of meaning or pattern. It's what human minds do. Find connections, build interpretations, create significance from randomness. The theory isn't true. It was never true. It's a ghost story we tell about a cartoon character, a creepypasta that became famous precisely because it recontextualizes something innocent and joyful into something dark and tragic. But the fact that it's not true doesn't mean it's not valuable. The exercise of examining the show through this lens reveals actual truths about narrative, consciousness, symbolism, and the human need for meaning. The theory works as analysis even if it fails as fact. It shows us how fiction can be interpreted, how symbol systems function, how the unconscious mind might actually construct experience if it needed to. It's useful fiction about useful fiction. The real Ash Ketchum, to the extent that he exists at all, is a cartoon character voiced by actors, animated by artists, written by teams of writers, designed by committees to appeal to children and sell products. He doesn't exist in a hospital bed. He doesn't exist in a coma. He exists in the same way that Mickey Mouse exists, as a collection of images and sounds that create the illusion of a character, an icon recognized globally, a construct that serves a purpose in entertainment and commerce. He's not tragic, he's not suffering, he's not experiencing anything because he's not conscious. He's lines on paper, pixels on a screen, a cultural artifact rather than a person. And that's okay. That's more than okay. Because what Ash represents, what Pokémon represents, is the power of imagination and play. It's children around the world sharing a common fantasy, engaging with fictional creatures, developing skills through games, forming friendships over shared interests. It's creativity externalized, packaged, distributed. It's commerce, yes, but it's also genuine joy for millions of people. The show has brought happiness to children and adults across decades and cultures. That's real even if Ash isn't. The companions he travels with aren't fragments of his psyche. They're characters designed to provide variety, to represent different types of people viewers might identify with, to teach lessons about friendship and cooperation. Pikachu isn't his humanity. Pikachu is a marketable mascot that became the face of a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Team Rocket aren't his shadow self. They're comic relief villains who provide consistent antagonists without being too scary for children. The legendary Pokémon aren't his unconscious awareness. They're cool designs meant to generate excitement and give players something special to pursue in the games. When we strip away the theory, when we return to consensus reality, Pokémon is revealed as something simultaneously more mundane and more miraculous than an elaborate coma dream. It's human creativity at scale. It's hundreds of people working to create entertainment. It's artists and programmers and writers and voice actors and musicians, all collaborating to build something that brings joy. That's not less meaningful than the theory. In many ways, it's more meaningful because it's real human connection, real human effort, real human imagination, making something new in the actual world. The reason the Coma Theory resonates, the reason people find it compelling despite it being demonstrably false, is that it taps into real anxieties. The fear that our experiences aren't real. The fear that we're trapped without knowing it. The fear that time is passing but we're not growing or changing. The fear that the people around us aren't genuine. The fear that we're alone in our own minds, generating everything with no real connection to external reality. These are existential fears that philosophy has grappled with for millennia. The Coma Theory gives these abstract fears a concrete narrative form. But here's the truth that's more comforting than the theory. You're not in a coma. Ash isn't in a coma. Reality is real. Time flows forward. Other people are genuine, independent consciousnesses. And aging is happening because you're alive and living and changing. The fact that you can worry about being trapped in a dream is evidence that you're not, because dreams don't contain that level of recursive self-awareness. The fact that you can analyze the Coma Theory is proof that your consciousness is connected to reality, processing real information, engaging with actual external stimuli. Ash doesn't age because he's not real. You age because you are real. That aging, that change, that progression through time that sometimes feels like loss, is actually the evidence of your authentic existence. Every birthday is proof you're alive. Every change is proof time is passing in the real world, not in a dream. Every relationship, every challenge, every mundane moment of boredom or frustration or joy is confirmation that you're connected to reality, that your experiences are genuine, that you're not trapped in an eternal loop, but moving forward through actual time. The Pokémon anime continues because it's profitable and popular, not because a boy is trapped in a coma. New regions are created because the games require new settings, not because Ash's psyche is expanding into stranger territories. The show will end someday, not because Ash wakes up or dies, but because economics change, audience interest shifts, or the creators decide they've told the stories they want to tell. And that's fine. That's how entertainment works. Things begin, they run their course, they end. It's normal, it's healthy. So as we come to the end of this long journey through a theory that isn't true but felt true while we explored it, let's take comfort in the mundane reality. You're listening to this video, probably trying to fall asleep, probably in your bed, in your room, in your actual life. Tomorrow you'll wake up older than you are now by one day. Time will continue flowing forward. The people in your life will continue being real, independent people with their own thoughts and dreams. The world will continue being vast and complex and sometimes difficult and sometimes beautiful, but always real, always external to your mind, always genuine. Ash's journey continues in reruns and new episodes, a perpetual adventure for a character who doesn't need to age because he doesn't exist. Your journey continues in actual time, aging you, changing you, moving you forward through genuine experience. And that, ultimately, is what makes your story more meaningful than any theory about Ash Ketchum. You're real. Your experiences are real. Your growth is real. And tomorrow, When you wake up, you'll continue your actual journey through the actual world, which is the only journey that matters. The Coma Theory is fascinating. It's creative. It's a masterful example of finding pattern in chaos, meaning in entertainment, depth in what was designed to be simple. But it's fiction about fiction, a dream about a dream, a theory about something that never happened to someone who never existed. It's a ghost story, a creepypasta, an intellectual exercise. And now that we've completed that exercise, now that we've traveled through the entire interpretation from beginning to end, we can let it go. We can return to reality. We can appreciate Pokémon for what it actually is. A joyful, creative, occasionally profound piece of entertainment that's brought happiness to millions of people across the globe. Sweet dreams, real ones this time. May you wake up refreshed, in your actual body, in your actual life, ready for another day of genuine experience. May you age gracefully, knowing that aging is proof of life. May your friendships be real and complicated and worth the effort. May your challenges be meaningful and your victories be earned. May you live in the real world, which is sometimes harder but always more significant than any dream. And may you always be able to distinguish between compelling fiction and actual truth, enjoying both for what they offer, but never confusing one for the other. Good night. Sleep well. And when you wake, remember, you're not Ash Ketchum. You're someone better. You're real.